Hey, I got a new intro. It'd help if I actually, if I was actually on here. Normal America Show. Now, I know that I told everyone that I'm not just going to be a member of the Crucible, and that was only going to be some of the content I was doing. Most of it's going to be focused on myself. But because I still haven't transitioned fully out of my work, I didn't know what my live stream would be today. And so I did watch Andrew versus Pearl Davis, and we're going to be trying a debate review. Now, I'll be honest, 80% of the reason for this review is to try to help me and my editor, Black Elk, sort of get our format down pat. Unfortunately, one of the things he asked me to do was, as a backup camera, to use my, excuse me, phone here. That's what he asked me to do. And I don't think that I'm going to be able to do that because what ends up happening is it's the angle doesn't work. Don't have the proper tripod. So the idea was to sort of set up what will ultimately be what allows him to edit this. Also, I gotta move. Was cleaning up here. My Hank man sort of made a mess a little up here. So this isn't a topic that I normally cover. I have to be honest. But I thought I would dive in because I was interested in this debate, sort of looking into it before it occurred, preparation, etc. I thought about just doing like a little 15-minute analysis of it, but I figure what the heck, we'll try to do a full-fledged debate review. So we're going to attempt to do that, see how that works out. I'm going to try to use her footage of that. That's what we're going to try to do. So, but ultimately, I'll set the stage for you all and then we'll begin. So give me a second here. I'm just a little disheveled trying to, here's what I'm going to do. It's so hot up here. So I got this thing. Let me know if the sound of this is something that starts to bug you all. I hope not, but but yeah, it should be fun. We're going to do a debate review tonight. Little things you may have noticed, I cut down the length of my intro. We'll work on having a good intro that's actually shorter as opposed to the one that I crappily made up myself. We also have, what else happened today that as we're waiting for people to come in here for a second. We had a good show last night. My editor did a great job. We had a good show, got a couple videos out of a panel that I did. There will also be, it was on Raging Tomato, Sarah the Raging Tomatoes channel. I will be debating this Friday on that channel about, is gender the same as sex? Or is gender different than sex? So we're going to sort of go into that. Now, I watched this debate live, so sometimes when I review debates, I'm going into it completely blind. This debate I watched live, so I'll give some prescriptions for it as I see fit. It'll probably be a long one here tonight, so apologies for that. I am going to try one thing here. All right. So we're going to try to just record over there. This should work. I'm hoping that this will work. But yeah, it's going to be a new format here. One of the things I'm going to do is ask any super chats that get sent in. I'm going to wait at certain intervals when reading them. So maybe like at 30 minutes, at 1 hour, at an hour and a half, at 2 hours, because it just becomes too messy to read them as they come in, like sometimes I do. So I'm trying to get more professional now that I'm going to be a full-time streamer. I do remind you all that I'm transitioning and I need a lot of help paying for my transition. So please, please, please help me in this difficult time of my transition. My pronouns remain the same, and yet my lifestyle is transitioning. So thank you for the help there. I remind you, there are other ways you could donate other than Super Chats. You can give to my PayPal at Robert Knorr, or through Buy Me a Coffee, you could become a subscriber, or give me donations through there, which I get to keep 95% of all the money that comes through there. I will have other forms of payment services available in the near future here, but those are two that you could start with. And then also get those Super Chats in. Also, does this guy suck or what? Please help me with my transit. Oh, so clever. Yes, I'm transitioning from my job into full-time streaming. So I'll set the stage for the debate here. They had a conversation recently. Pearl Davis, for those that don't know, is someone who sort of, I don't know how to describe her. She's very much likes to point out problems, men's issues, sort of red pill adjacent men's issues, by identifying problems in the dating market with relationships when it comes to men. Andrew is sort of coming this from more the perspective of recommending that people should basically adapt a Christian mindset and sort of risk mitigation strategies into getting married. Ultimately, I favor Andrew's stance on this more, and we'll go through some of that because I did sort of prepare to debate this argument at one point. So I'll let you know how I would have changed the argument maybe from Andrew, what Andrew did well, what Pearl did well, what either side did weekly, if I thought, but that's sort of the idea going into this. Why should you prefer me to analyze debates? Because I'm a pretty good debater. I debated in college 4.5 years, qualified for the national debate tournament, and then I coached and judged debate for about 5 or 6 years after that. So I've judged a lot of debates. I've moderated a lot of debates. And so maybe it puts me in a position to be something that someone's interested in hearing what my takes are on these sort of things. So I'm fully admitting I'm completely biased. I want Andrew to win this debate, not just because I'm actually an employee of Andrew Wilson, but also because I think that his side is less black-pilled. And it's something that we should actually push for. I think that the over black-pilled that Pearl relies on is too much. And I think it sort of gets a little bit depressing, if I'm honest. Um, it's a bit much almost. What frame do we want to use for this? Let's do this. So I'm going to be using Pearl's, and I do thank Pearl, as always, for letting people like me use. Did I get this right? Here we go. I'll use her channel. So it's always nice when people allow others to use their material and review debates. Of course, it falls under fair use, but still, nonetheless, I'm happy to do that. And I wish no ill to any of the people that I review debates, certainly true of both the people here. So we're just going to jump in, I think, and I'm just going to give you my thoughts as the debate goes on, and we'll see what goes. Ultimately, what to look for in this debate is Pearl is giving descriptions of the status quo and how bad things are, and Andrew's offering a solution, and Pearl's just merely saying, I don't think your solution will work. But she claims she doesn't even attempt to offer any solutions. Let people make their own mind up. And for me, just to sort of not bury the lead, that is a loss in a debate. Now, in the style debate I did, policy debate, we would call this a no solvency argument. So both sides isolate a problem. They say, the problem is the crops aren't going to grow this year. And Andrew says, I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to, because the crops aren't going to grow this year, we're going to get a cheap irrigation system. We're going to make sure we're getting out there at 6 a.m. We're going to water the plants. We're going to put fertilizer on the soil. And Pearl's just like, nah, that won't work. And Andrew's like, well, what are you going to do? I don't know. I'm not really about what will help the plants. I'm just saying your strategy won't work. And the problem is that by default has her sort of embracing the status quo. And so the harms of the status quo, being as significant as Pearl will admit that they are, it's sort of a tough bullet to bite. The Pearl's like, well, I don't know. I think that nothing is. She even says this at the end of the debate. She can't come up with any solutions that would be pragmatic. She just knows nothing. That's how screwed up things are for men. Nothing. I can't think of anything that it's feasible of working. So I just leave men to their own devices, and no one should be offering them advice. And I ultimately think that that's just not a good way to go about life and look at things. And so that in general, that's my thesis, that by default, Andrew's going to win because at least he's offering a prescription. Even if Pearl was able to prove there's a 98% chance that the prescription that Andrew is offering won't be successful, that's still a 2% chance that it will be successful, which is better than if I go with Pearl's worldview, which is 0% chance. The status quo is miserable, and I won't even suggest anything that could make it better, ever. And to me, this is a result of just being too black-pilled. Nope, there's no hope. That whatever, just throw your hands up. I haven't watched Pearl enough to know this, but I wonder, because she seems to have some tendencies of red pill. Does she say the same thing about like your Andrew Tates of the world? Does she say like, why are you giving men advice? Why would you do that? That's stupid. Don't give men advice. I mean, I don't know. Is she consistent on this? I wish it was something that Andrew would have asked. Anyways, I'm probably going to talk a lot, so let's jump in.
Question I asked Andrew this weekend. We had a debate where I just kept asking him the question, what do men get out of marriage? And I kept seeing all these, like the smartest like people way smarter than me, right? And they're like, why is the birth rate falling? Why are men dropping out of the workforce? Why are men not going to school? Why aren't they making as much money? Like, and these would be
real quick. Is that audio working for everyone? Is that loud enough? I hope so. So you can see she's asking Andrew, what do men get out of marriage? Well, what do they get out of it? That's the question that sort of led to this conversation. And it's not a bad conversation because it seems as if what Pearl's trying to say is marriage is a bad deal. She doesn't like come right out and say it because she keeps falling back to this sort of, it's a very sort of annoying tendency where it's like, I'm going to make a bunch of claims. So marriage, look how bad it is for men. But I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying each man, I'm not saying that. It's very similar to the old Jon Stewart. Well, I'm just a comedian. I'm just a comedian. Now, let me talk about politics. But when pressed on like, well, wait a minute. Like, let's interrogate some of your political beliefs. Hey, I'm just a comedian. That seems to be what Pearl's doing here. She's sort of suggesting like, hey, here's the problems with your solutions. Here's the problems with the status quo. Here's, marriage. It doesn't seem like anything will come of it. But I'm not saying anything. I'm not offering any prescriptions. So you can't say I believe X because I believe nothing. I don't believe anything. I'm just saying here are facts that I see.
People that were so much smarter than me. And I just keep asking the question, what does he get? And until conservatives, the right, the left, whoever can answer that question, men naturally do a cost benefit analysis. And the trends are just going to keep going the way they're going until they can answer this question and have a good answer. Now, I really want to finish this documentary. We've put together a lot of the footage, the passage.
We're going to skip ahead till the debate starts.
Netflix greats I've been full like so it's one up right now through other and that's
I assume when she brought in
10,000 and we had script with
Well, thanks for having me back. I wanted to revisit the conversation we'd had when I went out there in person. I thought we had kind of a bit of a spirited back and forth. I know that we agree on a lot of descriptors, but some of the prescriptors I thought we could get into again.
Give me a second. I've actually done something stupid, so give me a second. We're going to start this over. That was actually the wrong feed, believe it or not. Give me a second. Thank goodness we didn't start the debate, really, huh?
Do you have an extension cord up here?
Hi, wife.
I'm just trying to.
That's a good question. Let me see. 1 second.
In this door for you.
Thank you.
Well, it's hot up
It is definitely hot. I found this little. Oh,
the bank.
let me get this chat off here. All right, extension cord.
I'm sorry.
It's
I'm
all
not
right.
trying to blow up your spot.
No, it's fine. Thought I saw something. What you mean?
Well, even this is helping a little bit already.
Yeah, I don't see one up here. I mean,
Okay, I'll bring one up.
okay, don't worry about it
I
tonight.
have the air on in the guest room, and this fan's right here,
Okay.
so it'll.
Yeah, it feels that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate
Open
it.
a window. It's cold outside.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Do you need anything?
No, I'm good. Thanks. All right. There we go. What's going on? My wife was, it's like 100 degrees up in my office here. And so she meant to remind me to put the fan outside in the room so it's a little cooler. That's what was going on. So, all right. We should be good to go now. So hopefully this is the reason I'm using Pearl's feed instead of Andrew's is Andrew, when he stops live streaming, it shuts off. The video takes off from his YouTube. So I want to make sure that that's not going to occur. So
Sure.
You don't think that that's a good thing?
I 304 Destroyer. How's it going, Andrew?
Good. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfect. How are you?
Good. I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me back. I wanted to revisit the conversation we'd had
Sure.
when I went out there in person. I thought we had kind of a bit of a spirited back and forth. I know that we agree on a lot of descriptors, but some of the prescriptors I thought we could get into again.
Okay.
After I was thinking about some of your points, especially. So
Sure.
moving back, I wanted to start with this. Do you agree with me that promiscuity in women is generally bad?
Sure.
You don't think that that's a good thing?
I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole because good and
Okay.
bad doesn't matter. I'm in the business of predicting.
So you can see this is sort of the first time that this occurs in this instance where she's like, well, I'm not going to describe what's good or bad. I'm going to just predict. Now that's fine. It's possible to just be like, almost like an automaton that's like, I'm not evaluating whether something is good or bad. It's almost like being a reporter from a foreign country and watching two other countries or a country fight a civil war. You're like, I don't care. I'm just hearing it out. I don't think that's true, though. I think it's evident by what I've seen of Pearl that she clearly thinks that the treatment that men get is poor and is bad. I think she would say that. She wishes that that ought not be. And I think that also she would say then to this question that actually it's a bad thing that women are vastly promiscuous because if nothing else, it hurts men. I will be completely honest. My feeling is that she doesn't like women. And that's maybe an unfair assumption for me, but that is the legitimate feeling that I get from this, that she solely blames women for the problems that men may have in life and sort of holds them with some degree of contempt, perhaps because she thinks that there is an institutional benefit to being women or institution bias towards women. And so therefore she sort of looks at men as being illegitimately screwed over. Now, it's a fine worldview to have. I'm not criticizing that you can't, I don't think you should hate women for that. And maybe she doesn't rise to that level, but that seems to be where her bias is coming from. So I'm just being honest about what the feeling I get coming from her is. So I think like with questions like this, it seems to me like, I guess there's two possibilities that one, she literally has no opinion on anything about the topic that she spends the most time talking about, which is, it's just like, oh, like, for example, leading into this debate, she talked about funding for a documentary. I think about like how court systems and divorce screws over men, but presumably she'd say, well, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying men getting screwed over is a bad thing. At one point in this debate, she'll say, I knew someone who unalived themselves or was on the verge of unaliving themselves because of the way that this marriage went south. Or she repeatedly talks about Steven Crowder's marriage breaking apart. Am I to believe that legitimately she's like, oh, but I take no stance on whether or not that's a good or a bad thing? I'm completely amoral to that point. Some guy decides that he was screwed over in his marriage and he loses his livelihood and he's not allowed to see his kids. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just making observations. I don't believe that. I believe that the fact that she could say, look, I'm not making descriptions of what to do. I don't know what to do. I'm just isolating things that I see that are problematic, particularly from the lens of men and sort of the treatment that they get. But to be unable to answer just straight up questions like, well, is women being promiscuous a good or a bad thing? And say, I don't really want to take a stance on that, seems to either be disingenuous and sort of a debate bro type strategy. Like, well, I don't want to get pinned down on anything, so I'm not going to make any stances because I don't want to have to defend my stance. Or it's someone that somehow is very unique in humanity that could seem to talk so passionately about these issues while being completely dispassionate and having no moral opinion on whether or not the stories that she's telling and describing are good or bad things that are occurring to people.
Okay.
So
well,
if I had to predict where it's going to go, women are going to keep getting promiscuous.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
So your predictive model, I agree. I'm not going to get into like morals or ethics with you. That's not what I mean by good or bad, like moral or immoral. Right. But like, is it bad for women generally to be promiscuous? Like, does it lower their value structure?
You could say that, yeah, but I don't really always see promiscuous women have bad outcomes in real life, unfortunately.
What does unfortunate mean? If she doesn't take a stance on what's good or bad, and that's what she said previously, she's like, well, I don't want to weigh into the morality of this. Already, right out of the gate, she's like, well, yes, it would theoretically lower women's value, right? Because if sort of your sexual value or your value towards men or your value in society has something to do with your sexual behavior, then the less bodies that you've been with could increase that value. Every body that you're with diminishes the value of your sexual output. And she's like, well, regrettably, it doesn't seem. What do you mean regrettable? So it seems that she is actually making a moral proclamation on the promiscuity of women, of whether or not it's good or bad. Else, why would she say, well, unfortunately, I don't sometimes see that it leads to bad outcome? Why would it be unfortunate that it doesn't if she's not saying that there's something inherently bad about it?
Yeah, well, the thing is like, because if it is the case that you think that men are going to check out of society, they're going to check out and become promiscuous because marriage is a raw deal, right? Then you're actually assigning.
Some men don't care enough to even like some men are just going to check out. They're not even going to try to get sex.
Yeah. I agree. I agree with that. So, but wouldn't you be assigning these promiscuous women value then? Wouldn't they actually be a valuable asset to society if it is the case that if men can't get married and can just play the field and have sex with tons of women, wouldn't they actually be very valuable to men then?
Why would they be valuable to men?
Well, because obviously men want to fuck them, right? And if they're
men need sex, right?
Yeah,
that is a need for a guy.
So Andrew's making the point. Okay, so if we have this society where large swaths of men aren't trying to get married or have monogamous relationships, and they just want to have sex, then a woman who wants to have a lot of sex and is very promiscuous, that wouldn't diminish her value, because she's actually valuable to the men that aren't in for a monogamous relationship. And there is truth to that. Like, yes, like that, if we're evaluating on that level, then yes, the promiscuous woman actually isn't been devalued. Now, I think that Andrew's going to get to the point that, like, one of the ways that then we could help curb promiscuity, it's certainly, I think that it's best that most people are likely to listen to people of their same sex, sort of because it's easier to identify with. So women that would be telling women, like, look, this is why being promiscuous is bad, and men telling men, this is why you should settle down in a monogamous relationship, would be preferable. But both of those would then diminish culturally, it would diminish the value of promiscuity on both sides.
Then these women would be valuable, right?
Well, I think if they were valuable, they'd marry them, wouldn't they?
Well, so yeah,
Like,
well,
that's
this is a
the-
fundamental question, though. If you're
That's
not
the
going to
whole.
marry,
That's the whole
if
point.
you're not going to marry them and you're just going to have sex with them, then the
Yeah.
value's in the sex itself.
Yeah. I mean, men
Yeah,
do want to
yeah.
have sex. Yeah.
Yeah. So then that would be what would make women valuable, is that they were essentially that they were hoes. Essentially, would make them
I
valuable.
mean, they bring
right?
more value than the wives that are married and they don't sleep with their husbands.
You think hoes bring more value than wives?
It's an interesting thought, right? It depends on what you value more, right? If you look at sex as sort of a base human need, then if you're married and you're not having sex at all, then there is one of your base human needs that isn't being met, right? You know, there are many base human needs that we have. Obviously, a sex drive is one of those. You have a human need to eat. You have a human need to have societal relationships, to have, right? So it would be true that if what is the value of a partner that you're in a monogamous relationship that's refusing to meet one of your basic needs? So it's an interesting question. Now, there are other needs that could be being met, right? That would not be part of. And so it would be difficult to determine if you had, for example, a woman who you got married to who wasn't having intercourse with you, but was a fantastic mother to your child. How do you weigh the utility as a husband, as a man, for that wife to just some chick you met at the bar and you bang one night and then send her on her way? Now, no doubt the overarching point that there is a huge gap in the utility of being married to someone who's not providing one of the most basic needs that marriage was intended for. Certainly, I wouldn't argue with Pearl, and I don't think Andrew would either in that point, right? But to sort of qualify, well, is that type of marriage that could have other things, is that more valuable than just the chick that you meet one night at the bar and bang and send on her way? I don't know.
Than ones that don't sleep with their husbands, which is really common.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I went through and
so-
pulled a bunch of the stats, right?
Mhm.
So, especially when it comes to sexless marriages, that usually happens years into the marriage, over a
Yeah.
decade, in fact, before that
It's
starts.
after the youngest kid goes to preschool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's often
that's-
the
yeah.
case. And often those are only for limited amounts of time, right? Though not always, right?
Mhm.
But it's actually a more isolated case. When I look at this is from Petrelli Privatira LLC. They made a study on this. We're talking about Christian marriage, because you're asking, what's the incentive for men to get married?
Mhm.
Well, from a secular standpoint, I think I agree with you
Mhm.
that secularist men probably shouldn't. It looks like it doesn't
Well, we're
look
in a
very
but we're
good
in
for
a
them.
we're in a secular society, Andrew.
Not yet. We're getting there, but we're not there
I mean,
yet.
You don't think
But-
it's pretty secular?
Now, I'll admit, I don't know that this is the strongest argument from Andrew here, right? Saying, well, we're not really in the argument is more, there's two sort of fundamental prescriptions that we would be analyzing. So we isolate a problem. We say there is a problem in the dating scene. There is a problem, and both are looking at from the perspective of men. There is a problem with relationships, and they would agree on a lot of this, right? Where it's like, promiscuous women mean that, the women are going for like the top 10% echelon of men. And so these men are just banging a bunch of women, which means that the people that aren't in that 10%, the men, they're having a difficult time. They have to go down the pool to maybe the women that are only like in, D's and F's or whatever. And so this is leading to all sorts of problems for men. And because sort of the traditional roles that we would assume would be that women were valued to be chaste and were valued to be someone that would be mothers and have children for you and be homemakers, and because culturally we've shifted away from that. Men are having a really bad time, and many men are just checking out and being lonely, or they're just banging as many chicks as they can. And so it's sort of destroying the utility for marriage, right? That's the problem that they're isolating. Andrew says right out of the gate, yeah, with secular marriage, that's true. In other words, marriage that isn't, and I'm not going to put words into Andrew's mouth, but I think if this got flushed out more, it would come out something like this, right? Marriage that's done for the right reasons with the right risk mitigation in the eyes of God ends up being more successful than the average marriage that would be outside of those factors, that would be secular. So, for example, if I am a Christian and I say, what is life about? Life is about living in the image of Jesus. Life is about being a good husband, being a good father, having children. Then there's a reason why, if I find someone who shares those sort of religious and cultural beliefs, that us coming together in marriage and having children would be best for us as individuals. But if not, if you're secular and you're like, well, my values as a secular person is like, I want to be materialistic. I want to get the best job. I want to make the most money. In that sense, then yes, marriage probably doesn't make sense for a man. It would make more sense for a woman because they would view the man as the provider. So I'll get with the man so I'm provided for. But if the man's goal is just like, well, I'm interested in secular pursuits, such as hooking up with a bunch of women or accumulating a bunch of wealth, yeah, probably getting married is not going to help with those sorts of things. But the two potential solutions we're looking at is what is best for society? That's one question. So culturally, which direction should we push for society to move in that would be a net benefit to the majority of the people, whether it be morally or through a utilitarian calculus? Or individualistically. So me as a person, what should I be doing that would maximize my worth, my happiness, my value? Even if a prescription that's offered, and Pearl will routinely say this, and I do think Andrew could have pushed back on this better, even if it would not work for society, if you just say, we don't think that this solution would ever be tenable because enough people in society wouldn't go for it. Nonetheless, would this outcome be best for individuals? And we'll get to more of that as we go.
Secular now?
Not yet.
Like what percent of people even attend church weekly?
Well, that's true, but 70% of the populace does consider themselves to be, at least self-identifies as Christian.
But don't you need actions to match that?
Yeah, you do. But interestingly enough,
and
there must be, because it's only 20-25% of Christian marriages which end in divorce at all.
So I think the point, there's like two ships passing here. I think that the point Andrew should be making is, what doesn't matter if if 95% of the people in this country are secular, that's irrelevant. What I'm saying is you ought to be a Christian and you ought to seek out marriage through the risk mitigation strategies that I'll talk about. That would be best for society, and that would be best for you as an individual. Now, this idea of obesity is going to be brought up later in the debate, which is something that's near and dear to me. Actually, I don't know if it's brought up specifically or if it was just an argument that I had in my head. Pearl's, I'm going to give away some of it, and I'll bring it up again when I have. But Pearl's going to constantly say, well, you're lecturing, you're hectoring people, you're shaming men if you say, you know what, actually you're going to be miserable if you're just sort of out there trying to sleep with a bunch of chicks, or if you just completely check out of women in general. You're going to be lonely. A better solution for you would be you should try to take a bunch of mitigating factors to find a woman that maximizes your potential to have a good partner that you could have children with. That's sort of the prescription that Andrew's going to have. And she's going to say, but that's sort of selfish. That's you pretending you know better than people. But this would mean that you would never be able to say any basic truths. So Pearl, who talks about obesity statistics, it'll come up later, The problem would be, in Pearl's worldview, you couldn't say, hey, you ought to lose weight. It'd probably be a good thing if you lost weight, because the data seems to suggest if you're obese, you're more at risk for heart disease, and you're less active, and you're more prone to have depression, and you're more prone to diabetes. But Pearl would say, no, you can't say that. You can't say that you should lose weight. It would be good for you to lose weight, because that's lecturing people. That's shaming them. And you shouldn't do that. So again, she'll constantly say, like, well, I'm just providing descriptors. I'm just and Andrew's like, well, yes, Andrew's saying this is what would lead to the best outcomes for the majority of people. Of course, you yourself have to make your own decision. No one's forcing you. But this is the way, like, and you could do this with all sorts of things in life. Like, for example, you could say most men, it works best if men are providers. There's always going to be exceptions to that. You don't force that on people. But that doesn't mean that if the data proves out and you have proof that that usually leads to a better outcome, that you can't throw that out there. And you could say this about anything in life. You could say promiscuity is a better chance of leading to you contracting an STD. Therefore, you shouldn't be promiscuous. And Pearl would say, no, you can't say that. You could just say promiscuous leads to more STDs. But you can't say, therefore, you shouldn't be promiscuous. It's sort of nonsensical.
I mean, that's, again, what you guys say, right?
I mean, that's what the stats show.
Okay.
Yeah, 20 to 25%.
Now, and just to be clear, he's saying that the statistics show that Christian marriages have better results on average than non-Christian marriages. 20 to 25%, I think, divorce rate.
But Gen Z, you don't know what Gen Z is going to be. And that's the whole point.
Wouldn't they follow the same trends, roughly?
I would guess it would be worse.
Okay, so two things going on here. I think Andrew, who's focused on his particular solution. Now, you could agree or disagree with this solution. If you're not Christian, you might say, no, I disagree with Andrew's solution. Or maybe if you're not Orthodox like Andrew is, you might say, I disagree with what your version of a Christian marriage would look like, that it would, whatever. But he is citing data. I think that Andrew, obviously, for pushing his own interpretation of what he is recommending would lead to, on average, the best outcomes for men. It makes sense to hyper-focus on the specific type of marriage that he's talking about. But the problem for Pearl's going to be, and this never gets brought up in this debate, that by embracing the status quo, she's actually making it more likely for men to have worse outcomes than any form of marriage, on average. The problem is, if Pearl's going to say, I'm just here to describe, I'm just here to say, here is how things are, I'm not saying how they ought to be. Which, again, I think she's already contradicted herself, because she already used that term and gave you a little insight. It's unfortunate that promiscuous women don't have bad outcomes. That seems to be an ought statement. Nonetheless, if we ignore that and say she's just being descriptive, well, then you would think, if this is the topic you talk about a lot, that you would be descriptive of all aspects of this. So yes, it would absolutely have utility to be descriptive of outcomes for men who get married, particularly those that end in divorce, which Pearl is very articulate at in citing those statistics. But what she doesn't do is give you the descriptors of how many end in divorce. What are the outcomes for men that never get married? What are the outcomes for men that get married and never get divorced? And how do those compare? Now, lucky for you all, I've done that research. So here's the key point. Pearl's later going to bring up, and again, I'll bring this up when it comes. She's going to bring up this stat where she's going to say that getting divorced increases your suicide by 9 times. Now, it's true that there is data that suggests that. The problem is 9 times compared to what? And unless she's citing a study different than what I've seen, the study actually says that's true. You are 9 times more likely as a man who gets divorced to commit suicide. 9 times more likely than a woman who gets divorced. Now, it seems that Pearl's citing this data as a warning sign to be careful. If you get married and you get divorced, you're 9 times more likely to commit suicide. But that's not really what the majority of the data that I found showed. What I found showed that actually the number's around 2 times more likely. That's still significant. So in other words, if you're just a regular man who's never been married, and then you get married and get divorced, your suicidality increases 2 times. Now, why would we prefer to use suicide as a metric? Well, Pearl did this in both this discussion and in the previous discussion she has with Andrew. It seems that the reason that she's hinting to suicide is that it is a sort of the most obvious indicator of happiness. If you're ending your life, well, then you're clearly that's something maximum dishappiness that's occurring in that situation. Okay, fine. I'll use it as a placeholder for happiness in general. Otherwise, it's very difficult to measure happiness from study to study and see exactly which group, married men that aren't divorced, married men that get divorced, or people that were men that were never married. How do you measure their happiness? So I'm happy to use the metric she's using, which is suicidality. So if we're going to say, okay, if you get divorced, you're 2 times more likely to commit suicide, that's significant. And I have no problem with people knowing that knowledge before they get into the institution of marriage. Absolutely fine. The problem for Pearl is, which she doesn't cite, is if you never get married, what is your chance of committing suicide versus a person who gets married and doesn't get divorced? Does anyone have any guesses? So Pearl says, if you get married and you get divorced, suicide risk increase. And the reality is it increases by about 2 times. But what is the correlation between men that never get married versus those that get married and don't get divorced? It's 2 times. It's 1.75 to 2 times more likely. And the data is pretty stark on this. CDC data shows that suicide rates of 20 per 100,000 for married men versus 30 to 35 per 100,000 for never married men. A study in social science and medicine showed that married men had significantly lower suicide risks, about 0.5 to 0.7, that of never married men. So in other words, it goes like this. Married men have a very low risk of suicide. Men that never get married have basically a 2 times more risk of suicide. And then men that get married and get divorced have a 2 times over them. So if we're using that as a stand-in for happiness, would you get married? You might say, well, no, it breaks even, right? Because if you get married, you have a 50-50 shot of, yep, you'll decrease your suicidality by half, i.e. your happiness seems to increase by about that metric, or you'll get divorced and you double your risk. But it's not that simple. So think of it like a roulette wheel. Let's assume that you take all the numbers and all the special characters off a roulette wheel and you only have red and black spaces. If you land on a black space, you double your risk of suicide. If you land on a red space, you half your risk of suicide. So if you're thinking of it instead of suicide, take money. You have $1,000. If you place the $1,000 and it comes up black, you lose all 1,000. If it comes up red, you double your money. You either have your risk of suicide or double your risk of suicide. The question is, so you'd say, well, it's a 50-50 chance. Do you spin the wheel or not? But the question you have to ask yourself is, how many red spaces are there? The spaces that are bad, that double your risk, and how many spaces are there that have your risk? So in order to find that, we would have to find the data on what percentage of men get divorced. According to the U.S. Census, of men that were ever married over the age of 20, 33% have been divorced. That means 67% haven't been. That means when you're deciding to spin that wheel and you basically double up with a good result or double a bad result, depending on what color it comes up, you have 67 red spaces, which are good, and 33 black spaces, which are bad. Now, would you spin the wheel? Of course. Now, does that mean that you might not get a bad outcome? Of course you might get a bad outcome. But your chances are double of having the better outcome. And I wish that this was brought up, because what this becomes is a worldview between Andrew saying, here is my descriptive of sort of engaging in risk mitigation and in a Christian marriage, versus Pearl saying, I don't think that would work, and I think marriage is bad. But even without the particular strategy that Andrew's employing, if we're only saying, well, we're only interested in descriptors, we're not interested in solutions, well, then why is Pearl not giving the other end of this descriptor? She talks a lot about the bad things that occur when you get married and you get divorced, or when a marriage goes bad, but she doesn't talk about the benefits of when the marriage goes good. And she certainly doesn't talk about the negative outcomes of never even trying to get married. That includes not talking about the negative outcomes of being massively promiscuous, or not talking about the negative outcomes of being lonely because you pull yourself out of the dating market in the first place. Now, this argument doubly makes Andrew's position stronger, because Andrew's position will be, and all of the data that I just cited that shows how the vast majority, almost 2-to-1 of men that get married don't get divorced, and how the outcomes for them are twice as good as never getting married. That's all marriages. Andrew's argument is it would be even better if you engage in risk mitigation and if you engage in sort of embracing a Christian ethics and lifestyle and having a Christian marriage. So then it becomes even more favorable. So I think that that's sort of, for me, where I wish this debate would have gone. But nonetheless, let's proceed.
Why?
Because Gen Z women are the first women that are on social media. Plus, divorce keeps going up over time.
Okay. So she says that the trend that Christian marriages are better than regular marriage when it comes to divorce rates, that most likely won't apply to Gen Z. And Andrew says, why? And she says, because Gen Z's on social media. But that seems to be a non-answer. Like, I don't see why just being on social media would mean that the trends of Christian marriages having better outcomes on average than secular marriages wouldn't continue. At best, we could say maybe she says, well, we can't be sure because there is now this new variable that's been put in. But she doesn't really give any reason why that variable. It would be easy to intuit why perhaps social media would mean that there will be more divorces on average. That I would be able to accept. But I don't intuitively see why it would mean that the gap between successful secular marriage being how far below it is to successful Christian marriage, that gap will shrink because of social media. It might mean that formerly 20% of Christian marriages ended in divorce, and now because of social media, it'll be 30, and formerly 40% of secular marriages ended in divorce, and now it'll be 50. But that gap would still remain. She seems to be suggesting, no, we can't know that because of social media. which is technically true. Anytime that you enter a new variable, you can't be certain of an outcome. None of us could predict with 100% certainty the future, but she doesn't really give any sort of concrete reason why adding that variable itself would change the sort of pattern that Andrew's talking about.
Well, divorce is lower now than it has been ever.
Right, because people aren't getting married. Because
Correct.
you're kind of trying to
The
divert.
divorce isn't going up.
Because the
right?
thing is, you're
Now, again, not to get into the old per capita debate, but maybe I have not looked this up. I'm not sure, but maybe the total amount of divorces is down because less people are getting married. But the question that would matter is what percentages of marriages are ending in divorce, and is that increasing or decreasing? That I don't know. The most recent data I was able to find was from 2021 that suggested 33% of all men that have ever been married over the age of 20 have experienced a divorce.
trying to divert from the question. If you want marriage to increase, you have to give a good answer to the question.
Because it's the only way that you can have. It's the only way you can have children without single motherhood.
What do children get out of marriage?
Okay, so she's going to keep going back to this question, and Andrew already answers it. His answer is children. What do men get out of marriage? Children. It's the only way you get it without a single mother, right? Now, he makes that argument here, and he's going to remake that argument. Pearl's going to ask him over and over and over and over and over again. Now, admittedly, I think that Andrew maybe could spend a little more time in talking about what men get out of marriage. Here's what I would say. That if you are in a good marriage, what you get is, yes, you get children, but you also get a loving wife and a loving mother to your children. And that family unit itself is about the highest value that we could aspire to. That gives life meaning more than any sort of materialistic pursuit. Pearl is looking at through the lens of sort of a secular point of view. That if you don't say, I value being connected to someone that I'm in love with and having children with them and having a loving child and raising that child and doing everything I can with my wife in order to raise that child to be the best possible person that he could be or she could be. If you're not looking at that as having inherent value, there's all sorts of reasons that marriage, or for that matter, having children doesn't make sense. For example, one of the arguments with the low birth rates is, if you embrace a materialistic worldview and you say, well, what's life about? Well, I want to get the biggest house and I want to make the most money at work and I want to go on the coolest trips and I want to own the biggest yacht and the most cars and I want to have hobbies that cost money and collect things. Having a child will almost never be beneficial to those goals, because the truth is that having a child, and for that matter, getting married, probably isn't going to increase your economic value. Thus, if your ultimate goal is to accumulate the most things, accumulate the most money, or buy the most things, then probably getting married doesn't make sense. As a man, what would you get out of marriage? Nothing. You might say, well, sex. But if the option now is, because culture has shifted to sort of this free sex movement, you don't need to get married. Formerly, you needed to. Formerly, we societally shamed. So you could get sex without getting married, but it would have been shameful in polite society. So if you're a member of polite society, why would you get married? For secular reasons? Well, so that you could have sex. But now you don't need to do that. And that's sort of Pearl's argument. Why would you do that now? The downside is the woman's going to cheat on you anyways, and she's going to divorce you and take all your stuff, and it's going to cause you a bunch of stress. And once you get divorced, your suicidality rate's going to increase 2 times. So why even bother? Don't even bother to get married. And the answer is, when Andrew says children, what he's really saying is, because there are things in life far more valuable than just material things. That's why. Now, we could do a whole debate on the value of a loving marriage and children and a loving family and a great wife and a great mother, and what that value is, and how do you weigh that value versus a new car, a better job. These are value questions that sometimes are difficult to answer. I think that anecdotally, one of the things that you could do is look at people. Mo money, mo problems. Data seems to suggest this, by the way, that through metrics that we use to measure happiness, of course, if you're not having your basic human needs met, so for example, if you are so poor that you can't afford a home, you can't afford food, then your happiness is very low. But once you reach a certain threshold where your base necessities are being met and you have extra money for, hobbies and other sorts of social pursuits, it seems to be there's a plateau. And then getting more money starts to gradually decline people's happiness. The more you have to worry about. And I think that it's even on these online spaces, again, this is anecdotal. I know I might seem like a ranting and raving lunatic. Maybe you would say that about Andrew Wilson at points. But I think it's evident how happy we are. And I think a lot of these people that you see that aren't in committed relationships, or they're in open relationships, or they don't have children, I think that a lot of times you could see they're sort of miserable people. And I see that in my life as well. Certainly, I know people anecdotally that have been through terrible divorces and they're miserable. But the happiest people I know are in loving marriages, by a long shot. And so then if I'm asking myself, well, what do I desire in life? What is the best thing that I could aspire to? And I say having a loving wife, in the words of Andrew, would be in sort of the Christian sense, who's a great mother and will have children with me. If that's the peak value that I'm shooting for, what are the chances I get that if I never attempt to get married and have a wife? Zero. There's no chance. Is there risk? Of course there's risk. Anything that could provide value for you in life has some sort of inherent risk attached to attempting to get it. Else we'd just stay in our homes all day to be risk avoidant and have miserable lives. That to me is, and I'll admit, it's easy to Monday morning quarterback these sorts of things. I wish that Andrew would have spent more time focused on this. But as you'll see, Pearl continues to ask the same questions. There's a lot of contentiousness, interruptions, etc. that occur throughout this debate. And so it's hard to stay focused on that sort of thing. But when Andrew says, what do men get? Children. That's what we get. There's nothing like going fishing with your son. There's nothing like watching him at his first t-ball game. There's nothing like waking up in the morning and having him run to you and give you a hug. Sure, that's anecdotal on my part, but that's my life. That's what I've seen. And if I could see my life in a crystal ball, like sort of like It's a Wonderful Life, and I could have seen a future without my son and with my son, it is not even remotely close how much better my life is with a loving wife and a son like that. Not even close. Does that mean I have a perfect marriage? No. My wife's wrong all the time. I'm constantly right. No, I'm just joking. But of course, you bicker, you fight. You have little individual goals that might be different. Maybe she wants to go to some concert and I'd rather just sit at home. But if that's the peak value that I could have, that's where the change in culture and society comes from. Pearl's argument, it would be, no, you can't aspire to that. You can't tell people that that's what they should aspire to, because all we could do is give descriptors. But even in that world, we could give the descriptor of what does it look like to have a wife. And by the way, if from the perspective of a woman, what does it look like to have a husband? And again, the data backs this up. Being a mother, absolutely, and traditional gender roles absolutely tend to make women more happy. I'm not as hard on this as other people like Andrew. And even Andrew, no one's saying like women should never be allowed to work. We're saying that sort of the idea of women being mothers and caretakers and men being providers, there's a reason that those gender roles were so prolific because it works. I believe that it works because it's biological and spiritual. But for whatever reason, it doesn't matter if you're religious or not, it works. And people, and so we'll get to more.
Well, if mommy and daddy aren't married, right, then the children have very, very bad outcomes. Single mother homes have terrible outcomes, and single father homes aren't tenable, generally speaking, because they're the working parent, right? So the only way for men to have families is through marriage.
So what do women get out of marriage?
They generally get resources. They generally get resources, and they get access to status, social status, security, things like this.
And what do men get out of marriage?
They get children out of marriage.
Okay. And what do they get out of marriage that they couldn't get from just a live-in girlfriend?
Mothers. So here's, an intact family, in other words.
Okay,
so,
and that's, Andrew says, an intact family, mothers, right? Now, Pearl seems to be if you read between the lines, what Pearl's going to suggest, it seems she's suggesting is like, but if there is a intrinsic negative to marriage for men, in other words, you run the risk of divorce where they could take half of your stuff. So why get married? Why not just bring the girl in, live with her, bang her, have a kid? Why not just do that and skip the step of marriage? She could still be a mother. And Andrew says intact family. And he's right? Because if you just bring in the live-in girlfriend, all sorts of things. One, although Pearl will be right that the legal system has been skewed against men, your chance of having custody of that child diminishes if you're not married. Your rights for that child will diminish if you're not married. So if things ever go poorly, she'll still be able to leave. She'll still be able to get you for child support and everything, and your chance to have access to that child diminishes. Second, there is intrinsic value anyways in engaging in a monogamous covenant that says that we are engaging in this institution of marriage, right? I think that that's true, that there is value in that. But Andrew wouldn't necessarily make that argument because he's already previously made the argument that he thinks that a secular marriage, i.e. a marriage that's not in the eyes of God, that's just something signed off on by the government, is sort of worthless. Yes, in the secular sense, sure, it's a bad financial deal for men and they could just bang a chick and get a kid without that. But Andrew's making the argument that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying option 3, a Christian marriage. Getting married in the eyes of God. That is one of the things that is prescribed to us in Christianity. And even beyond that, once you embrace that sort of Christian ethic, if the man and the woman are legitimately doing so, then the outcomes of that marriage itself get better. Furthermore, even though it's not brought up in this debate, and I wish Andrew would have brought this up, the data backs it up. Because again, the data seems to suggest that men that never get married, which would include both types of men that Pearl could be talking about, which is men that have checked out from the dating scene completely and they're just not having sex, their suicidality rate is higher, 2 times higher than men that are married. And men that are heavily promiscuous would also be included in that group. So what do men get out of marriage? Not just kids, not just children, but happiness. And how do we know that? Because the very types of data that Pearl's citing that shows how unhappy men get when they get divorced seem to suggest that men are basically twice as happy when they get married, if they're not divorced. I'll get to the super chats here in a minute. We'll get to some of them, but I'm trying to keep the flow of this going. You can see I've already been going an hour and we're only, I don't know. We have a long way to go.
Here's the thing:
if the woman lives with him,
the thing is when we look at
hang
on. Well, let me respond to it.
Go ahead,
we look at the social data for what you're talking about, this happens all the time. That's called a single mom, right?
Mm-hmm.
You live with the chick, you impregnate the chick, you're not married to the chick.
Crowder's in the same position. So are a lot of
he doesn't have children with some. No, he doesn't.
But again, and she, obviously, you could tell terrific stories about all sorts of individuals, but the data seems to back up that on average, the outcomes are better for married men that don't get divorced than they are for men that never get married. Yes, things went bad for Steven Crowder, of course. Her argument here is, but the negatives that you're talking about single motherhood, if you don't get married to the chick, that can also happen if you're married. But Andrew's already said, but the social data seems to back up that those outcomes are better with marriage.
He doesn't have children with some live-in girlfriend, right?
Right, but he's not with the mother of his kids now. He had a really public divorce.
Yeah, but there's a different.
So, like, I know, but my point is, you can say data all you want, but when we're like, people are witnessing conservative people that pushed a lot of this stuff getting divorced, like, men are going to naturally do a cost benefit analysis and realize there's no difference.
Well, and two things here. You should do a cost benefit analysis. Obviously, no one would suggest that we should twist your arm and force you to do something. Each of us in our lives should make decisions, hopefully with as much information as possible, and try to make the decision that would be best for ourselves. That's what free will is about. That's what choice is about, of course. But that doesn't mean that the rest of us shouldn't be able to say, here's what we seem to think is the preferable outcomes. For example, doing certain drugs might feel really, really good at the time. But if you're likely to get spiked with fentanyl and die, or it's going to have long-term health ramifications, etc., should we not, as outsiders, say, wait a minute, there's a lot of risk in that? That's probably not a good way to live. It feels good in the moment, but on average, you're going to have long-term negative outcomes that would outweigh the feel-good of the moment. It's up to you to make that choice. Now, you could say, well, we could pass laws that outlaw certain drugs. Sure. But ultimately, it's up to the individual to make the choice. But we should still, as a society, push values that would not only be best for society if the majority of people shared those values, but theoretically would be best on average for the majority of individuals. Being a drug addict on average is bad. We should be able to say that, right? Now, she's right that if you have someone like Steven Crowder that seemed to push these conservative values, who himself is going through a difficult time with divorce, then yes, that could be influential to people that look to Steven Crowder for sort of an example on how to live your life. But it doesn't change the underlying data. It might change the message, but then ironically, what that's going to do is make her criticism of Andrew of, but you're pretending to be like a know-it-all and you know everything and you shouldn't be telling people what to do. It makes it all the more necessary, because what she's admitting is people will sort of, it doesn't matter what the data says on whole, people will see these public anecdotal stories of people they find influential when things go bad, and they'll say, oh boy, that subjectively affects me more than an analytic objective look at the data would. All the more reason to have people on the other side of that ledger that maybe young men could look up to and trust, saying, actually, there is another way. Now, for anyone who doubts this, I just want to say this. If you're on the left, for example, and you're criticizing this, or you're a centrist or whatever, who would you rather have society looking up to? Someone who says, you know what you should do? You should do your due diligence to try to find a partner that shares your belief in God, that has behaved in as least sinful way as possible, to take steps to do your best to ensure that your risk is mitigated, that your marriage will work out before you propose, to wait until marriage, to get married and then have children. Would you rather have that as something that people are prescribing as the way to maximize happiness for men? Or would you rather have it be the red pill people that are like, here's how you do it. Women want to be treated like dirt. Here, we're going to tell you how to treat women like dirt and just treat them as property so that you can have sex with as many of them as possible.
So here's the cost benefit. Here's a cost benefit analysis, Em.
And so, my other question too would be, who do the kids belong?
Again, this is difficult because she makes this point, and that's one of the central points of this debate. And already she's going to keep coming back to this. What do men get? What do men get? Andrew says mothers and children. And she's like, yeah, but Steven Crowder, look what happened with him. Now he's not with his children. And Andrew's like, well, let me explain. Let me do the cost benefit analysis. In other words, what Pearl claims to want to do, be descriptive of how things are, not being prescriptive of how they ought to be. So when Andrew starts to make the descriptive case, she's like, no, I have another question.
Belong to? Do they belong to him or do they belong to her?
Yeah, so I believe in patrilineal society. I think that children belong to their fathers,
right?
and always have thought so. And that would be a form of reform inside of the court. And by the way,
I would disagree with that. I think the children belong to both the mother and father. Nonetheless,
traditionally this was always the way it happened.
But in society today, where women get custody 90% of the time, who do the kids belong to?
That's not the case anymore. They don't get it 90% of the time now.
To her? Do they belong to her or do they belong to him?
Well, they belong to the court system. Okay. They're the ones who are making the allocation.
And where are the majority of the time who gets custody?
Yeah, that's generally speaking women.
Okay, so think where we're at here. She's like, why would you get married? To have kids, right? To have a mother, a good mother to your kids, to have a family, intact family unit. That's why to get married. There's value in that. And she's like, yeah, but who owns those kids really? If there's a separation, who's going to end up with those kids? Majoritarily the woman. Okay, but what's the logical extrapolation of what she's trying to say? Even if that's true, which certainly, okay, that's true. Andrew's point is, well, it's getting better, but okay, let's throw that out and let's say it wasn't getting better. Then what's the logical extrapolation of what Pearl's trying to say? Well, then there's no value to having kids. There's no value to having kids or to having a good mother to the kids because she'll just, anytime she wants, she'll just take them from you anyways. So why bother? She makes this claim. Again, she's saying she's being descriptive, but the descriptive nature is in response to an ought statement, a prescriptive statement that Andrew's making. And so it's running defense. Again, what we called this in debate was no solvency, right? I'll give you another example that maybe this analogy will fit more. There's a flood coming towards your house. Andrew says, let's get sandbags. Let's try to get a ditch going so we can redirect the water. Pearl's like, now that won't work. And by the way, if we save the house and there was a divorce, who would be likely to get the house anyways? Me, right? So what would be the value of trying to redirect the water? Well, the value is to save the house. Yeah, but do you really own the house? Wouldn't your wife just end up with it anyways? You see the problem? Oh, okay. Then I guess let the water ransack the house. Now no one owns it. The only potential for the true happiness that's being offered in this debate is from Andrew. Even if she's right that there is a huge percentage chance that his prescriptions will not solve things, she's not going to be able to argue that there's a 100% chance that they don't solve it. And so unless she has independent reasons why his prescriptives are negative, in other words, she's making defensive arguments against his position. I don't know if that would work, but she's not saying what you're doing would make things worse because she's claiming she's not even putting a value on what is good or bad. So then why wouldn't you attempt, if your context is just this debate and who's winning it, why wouldn't you attempt to go with Andrew's position? He's the only person who embracing their side of the debate has any potential to lead to a positive outcome. And I'm sorry, I'm not persuaded by Pearl saying, but I'm not offering prescriptions, I'm just offering descriptions. Well, that only works if you're trying to be holistic in the descriptions you're offering. And because you're not being comparative of describing, well, okay, you're accurately describing what happens to someone like Steven Crowder who gets divorced, but are you describing what happens to someone like another big streamer like Destiny that decided to be in an open relationship or someone who decided, another big streamer who decided to never get married? Or to a big streamer who did get married and never got divorced? Are we being comparative? In effect, it's sort of ironic, but again, going back to sort of debate that I did, one of the arguments that people would make against you, we called in policy debate a critique. And a critique was usually philosophical, but it was a philosophical rejection of a fundamental premise of, or a fundamental core of what your plan you are offering. Most critiques would be like a critique of capitalism. So the subject would be something like this. The topic of the debate would be the same all year. It would say something like, resolve, the United States federal government should substantially reduce subsidies in one of the following areas. If you're affirmative, you have to have, at a minimum, United States federal government substantially reduce subsidies in one of these areas. So you might say, the U.S. federal government will do a 30% subsidy reduction on corn. Now you could argue, well, is 30% substantial? That's a story for another day. But if you're the negative and you're going to oppose teams, at a minimum, you know that every single team that you debate that's affirmative will have to have the United States federal government take some action. And so you would make a fundamental critique of the United States federal government. So you would say, U.S. federal government engages in capitalism, we should reject capitalism. Okay, sounds good. Now, for me, who's just some layman redneck, the first time I heard a capitalism critique, my question was, well then, what system are you endorsing? Socialism, communism, mercantilism? Like, what are you offering? And they were like, well, we're not embracing a system. We're just critiquing capitalism. We say we ought to reject you because capitalism has flaws. Okay, but what are you suggesting? We're not suggesting anything. We're just pointing out the flaws in capitalism. That's in effect what Pearl's doing. She's just like, I'm not offering any solution. I'm just offering a critique. But you could do that of anything. If you only look at one worldview, it's entirely possible to say there are problems with that worldview. Yes, there are problems with marriage. Absolutely. But how does that system of being married compare to not being married? And she never gives descriptives of that. So the idea that she's like, well, I'm not making any judgments, I'm not saying how people ought to live, in effect, she is by only critiquing one narrow slide of that. If it was just about being descriptive around men and relationships, then she would be descriptive of all the factors. Now, in her defense, maybe she is outside the context of this debate. But within the confines of this debate, seems to be agreement on a lot of the descriptors that are wrong with the status quo. Andrew is giving a unique perspective on sort of the type of marriage and mitigating factors that we could reach that will assuage some of the problems that Pearl talks about with marriage, and saying that those outcomes are better than the status quo. And Pearl's just like, I don't know that it'll work. But that's just a critique. Of course, you could say, well, that might not solve it. Right, but why not try that? It's the best idea that we have within the confines of this debate.
I agree.
Okay, so what do men get out of marriage? If
Yeah,
the
so
majority of the time
yeah.
the kids belong to her and not him.
Okay, but here's the thing. You got to let me actually answer.
Okay.
So I'll try to answer this question, but it's comprehensive. So the step one, you have to reform the system, the court system. Men have to move towards the reformation of the court system.
Step one, change the court system. In other words, even though it hasn't been said, it hasn't been outlined, he's assuming Pearl's arguments correctly, and I don't think Pearl has a problem with this, that there are fundamental flaws with the court system when it comes to divorce and men getting screwed over or men losing custody battles, etc. So step one, make steps to incrementally reform those systems.
Is that challenging? Yes, but prenuptial agreements, as cited, I went and looked at the data again. They are mostly enforced. That is the case.
Prenups are a way to mitigate your risk of having the negative outcomes of divorce. Now, again, Andrew, he didn't spend a lot of time on it because Pearl sort of jumped in, but he sort of said unchallenged that what men get are loving wives, children, intact family unit, mother to their children. He hasn't had a great amount of time, and nor does he, throughout this debate, illustrate what the inherent value in that, which I would argue is the pinnacle of value that I as a man could seek to achieve. Having a child and maximizing my relationship with the child and that child's well-being by having a loving wife and a loving mother for that child. To me, that's the pinnacle of value that I could achieve. Maybe you could argue that being Christian and getting into heaven, or whatever religion you have, getting into, being rewarded in the afterlife. But other than that, to me, it's a no-brainer that that's the most inherent. Doesn't mean it would work for everyone, but for me, I think for the majority of people that would be what would make you happiest. You might not think it. You might think, no, it'd be winning the lottery. But I think that what you'll find, what bears out, is the data seems to show like becoming extremely rich like that doesn't seem to necessarily increase your happiness, other than the fact that once you're no longer struggling to afford bills or to eat and things like that, of course, that makes you happier. But there's a plateau to this. So now Andrew's talking about mitigations of the harms that Pearl is. He's playing defense to the harms she's discussing, right? And so he says, reform the court system, then things like prenups.
Right,
When
but
it comes to,
when they're contested,
hang on, Pearl.
Pearl,
let me finish, Pearl.
when they're
finish.
contested, because when they're
because
contested, you're
like,
still
I'm not allowed to. I'm not allowed to make a point. Only you're allowed to make points.
You're still gonna get dragged to court. That's the problem. So a lot of guys, if the prenup is contested,
you're not going to get dragged to court. This is the issue, right?
Okay,
Like
okay.
this is a performative contradiction. Here's how.
Okay.
Because you say that women are reliant upon these men for resources. That's what women are getting out of it. So why is it if you had a prenup, they're not going to get resources? Why would they drag them to court? Why?
Because they're spiteful. Why did Crowder's
but they would be.
Now, this is an interesting part of the debate, and I think you can see, I'm not even saying that Pearl's wrong here about some women, or maybe even about most. I don't know. Andrew's making the argument that when we're talking about the devastating effects of divorce, a lot of it has to do with the men being left destitute financially and societally and emotionally. Holy cow, sorry about this. But because women out of marriage are getting resources, that's what they've agreed, both of them seem to have agreed, that's what women get out of marriage, that they won't jeopardize losing those resources if there's a prenup. And Andrew says, actually, the prenups are usually pretty effective, right? In fact, data I saw, it's difficult to find the exact numbers, but it seemed to suggest that prenups probably lower your chance of getting divorced by about 80%. Now, I was not too convinced with that study, but that was the only thing I was able to find that had any sort of number to it. Nonetheless, I'm not putting a lot of weight on that, but Andrew's sort of making the argument that the reason for divorce, or the reason that it would be less likely to lead to divorce, because women are afraid that they would lose that resource, which was the reason that they got married in the first place. And Pearl's like, but they would still do it out of spite. Now, no doubt that's true for at least some women. They would say, nah, even if I lose my resources, it's worth it just to screw you over. Could be true. I would tend to agree that it still would significantly mitigate. Although a woman would be spiteful in addition, a man may be as well, by the way, but would be spiteful in addition to getting those resources that they felt necessary. Would they be spiteful at the expense of the resources? And I don't know that that's the case, but Pearl seems to be pretty convinced.
Why did Crowder's wife?
She got a bunch of fucking money.
I know, but why did Crowder's wife leak footage to the press? She didn't have to do that. She'd probably
because she thought it would help her case for resources.
Right, but the problem is in the court of public opinion. Women are spiteful. It's not always about money. Ashley St. Clair was offered a ton of money just to shut up, right? She didn't shut up.
Yeah, but here's the thing, right? Ashley St. Clair is going to get the money either way, right? She has the kid in the arrangement. That was not a marriage. Inside of a marriage, if Crowder had signed a prenup, I bet you things would have been completely different across the board. Same thing with most men who are wealthy, who sign prenuptial agreements. They end up, women want the resources. That's the whole game, right? I want the resources. If they can't get the resources, it's an incentive for the behavior. Not only that, but here's the other thing. If you promote against marriage, against the idea of marriage, and I'm not saying that you like this idea that I'm Michael Knowles or something, I'm telling men, just take the plunge and take the risks. No, we're both doing risk mitigation. Pearl's doing risk mitigation. I'm doing risk mitigation. What I'm saying with Pearl saying with risk mitigation is for no man is it ever worth it. So just play the field.
I did not say that. I did not. Well, I don't tell men what to do.
In fairness, she did not say that. She just selectively preferred descriptors or provided descriptors that only led to that outcome. Getting married leads to bad outcomes. She didn't say, oh, and here's the descriptors of the bad outcomes that come from not getting married. And here's the descriptor for the outcomes of the good outcomes that come from getting married. So while it is true that she never said the words, hey, risk mitigation of how to protect yourself so you don't, and getting married being a bad idea, she's like, I didn't say that. That's true. She just provided descriptors that come to the logical conclusion that you shouldn't get married.
Okay.
I don't think it's my
I
place.
think it ultimately reduces to that, though.
Mhm.
So the thing is that my position is just this: risk mitigation. If you want to have children in a family, the best outcome for the kids it's going to be marriage. Like no matter what, it's going to be marriage. But
Right,
you have to do risk mitigation.
That's what's in it for the kids.
And for the man.
Not
Now, it's interesting. Before we get to the and for the man portion, right? Just think about that. Even if it was only what's best for the kids, right? That's certainly what would be best for society. And remember, we talked about there's two sort of benefits that we can see. There are the how we culturally ought to try to move things to benefit society as a whole, and then how is we as individuals ought to act to benefit ourselves as individuals. Now, it so happens that many times you benefiting yourself as an individual would benefit if everyone did those sorts of things, would tend to benefit society. For example, if a big fat guy like me decided to lose weight and get healthier, and a bunch of other big fat guys decided to do the same thing, that would have benefits to ourselves as individuals because our health would be better, but it also have benefits to society because more men would be healthy. And that would mean less resources going into our medical services for preventable diseases because of obesity. So both of those things would simultaneously be true. Here, if Pearl even wins the argument that marriage is no benefit to men, it's just only benefit to children, okay, even if that was the case and we ignore how, as a father, you having benefit for your children is probably the highest value that you would have, it certainly is for me, and probably many, many other, a high percentage of men. But even if we would ignore that, it still would be good for society to have children being raised in the best possible environment. Pearl seems to be like, well, what if men just want to be totally selfish and have no responsibilities whatsoever? What's best for them? And so you can't say, oh, well, having a loving wife, that's good for the wife. Well, having a child that you can take care of and do, that's good for the child. But what about you? I want a wife. It makes me happy. I want a child. I want my child to be raised in the best possible circumstances. Now, that's for the benefit of the child, not for you. But it could be mutual. For me, benefiting my child is beneficial to me. In addition, having a better society is better for me as a man. So a society where children aren't being all raised by single mothers who are struggling is better for me to live in. It would have less crime. It would have more resources.
for the man, because when you get married, you're just adding on another layer.
Of what?
Of now she can go for alimony. Because a lot of times it's not about the money, Andrew. I mean, yeah, like sometimes it is the money, but it's like men want to stop dealing with crazy women. Like the amount of money men will pay to get a wife to stop nagging him. And now she can contest, she can, if she chooses, contest the prenup and drag him to court. He could agree with the terms that she like asks for or whatever just to get it over with. But it's like the spitefulness of women. It's not necessarily always the money. And so again, you're going back to, well, it's best for the kids, right? But you don't answer the question, what's best for him? What
Having a family is what's best for him.
Right.
By every single conceivable metric, having a family is what's best for men. It lowers the rates of STDs. It earns the earning income goes up. Their general welfare and happiness in a happy marriage goes way up. We can tell because we can look at the suicidality of men who have gone through terrific divorces or who stay single, right? And their depression rates are sky high. All of these things are sky high.
Why do you think they make more money in marriage?
Okay, so she just sort of glossed over that. He was like, by every conceivable metric, their wealth, their happiness, lower suicide rates, by every metric, men being in good marriages is better for them. It's not just better for the kid. It's not just better for the wife. It's also better for them. And so he says, so we could look at comparatively between people that are in horrific divorces or people that have never been married and look at their outcomes when it comes to earning potential, when it comes to sort of general happiness and things we weigh to that. And it is on average less by pretty much every metric that we see. Therefore, it could be mutual that marriage is the best circumstance for the child to be raised. But in addition, the data seems to back up that it is the best circumstance for the man as well as the woman and child. And she just glosses over it and says, well, why do men make more that are married?
Well, that would be the incentive for their kids.
Well, right. To keep up with kids are cheap. It's women's spending habits that are expensive. Right? The Botox, the clothes.
Yeah.
I mean, we had your wife on.
This,
we had your wife on, and she was going through the costs of kids. It's not as expensive.
I don't know what the data that Rachel would have talked about with this is, but I can tell you, having a child, kids are expensive. Now, if you tried to raise your kid as cheaply as possible, so you just had the bare minimum, what would the cost be? So let's say you homeschool, you eat meals that are as cheap as possible, you don't provide entertainment opportunities that would be considered superfluous, like technology, like, video games or a certain amount of toys, et cetera, et cetera. You're not doing hobbies that could cost money, like t-ball, things of that nature. Yeah, maybe you could get away with the cost of a child would be something like $8,000 to $10,000 a year. But still, most people aren't looking at it that way. So, for example, when I'm working and I'm thinking about like saving and like my 401k, yes, there's certainly a big portion of that is what will I do when I retire? But I think if you talk to my dad or my wife's parents or many of your parents or many of you that are older yourself, you start to worry about what will I leave my child? That's why this sort of estate tax is so horrendous to me. One of the biggest incentives to provide people to work and accumulate wealth is the ability to pass that down to their child. Whether that be while their child is young and providing excess things for the child, or whether it be saving up and providing for a good life for that child when they get older. Is it true that wives can be expensive too? Sure, that could be true. Yeah. Again, certainly, though, it's not reductive as that's in totality. Many wives themselves, I'm sure Andrew would be against this. It's not the way it is in my family either, because I do believe that it should be me working and providing and my wife being the caretaker and the homemaker. But many wives do work. But again, this is sort of a point, like, what is the art? Okay, let's say even that Pearl's right. Kids are cheap. They only cost like $2,000 a year. It's the wives that cost a lot of money. Right. So then we're weighing a materialistic concern, how much money as a man you have versus the benefit that you get from having a loving wife and a child, which I think is priceless. It's worth more than some dollar amount.
Seemingly is what people say, according to.
Yeah, so I just real quick though,
like
90%. It's up to 90%. The vast overwhelming majority of prenuptial agreements are not successfully contested in court. It seems like a massive incentive for women if they want to hold their resources, even from a secular side, to do this. But if you combine this with the Christian side, the Christian ethics side of very religious women, the divorce rate goes down to damn near nil.
So Andrew, so again, I could make the argument that Andrew's making without any of this, without the prenup, without the Christian marriage portion of it, because the data seems to suggest that only 33% of men over the age of 20 that have ever been married are divorced. So it may be that 40% of marriages end in divorce, but if only 33% of men that have ever been married to be divorced, that seems to suggest that there's a non-insubstantial portion of men that have been divorced multiple times. So that would count as another marriage that ended in divorce, but not another individual man that had been divorced, if that makes sense. So if the men that have been divorced is only 33%, and their outcomes and happiness are roughly doubled, at least when it comes to suicide rates, they have their rate, then why wouldn't we say to maximize your happiness, you get married? And yeah, there's a 1/3 chance that you're going to have an outcome that would lead to you being more miserable than if you didn't get married at all. But you're all but consigning yourself to being miserable if you decide to totally check out or just become promiscuous and sleep with as many people as possible. That's the status quo. The data doesn't lie. Andrew makes a step further and says, but we can make those numbers even better through mitigation, such as a prenup, such as embracing a Christian ethic. And he gives a bunch of other mitigation strategies later. So in other words, Pearl, who's just basically not providing any prescriptions, all she'll have is the ability to run defense on Andrew and his sort of prescription, which is risk mitigation, Christian marriage. But the holes she'll poke in it are only using facts based on types of marriage that haven't engaged in that sort of mitigation.
Okay. Well, are most women religious in this society?
No.
Okay.
But neither are most men.
Okay. Right. But so now you're going into like selling your religion, right?
Well,
now,
only if you want to have a family. Well, if you want to have the most successful family, yeah.
Right. But I mean, Orthodox is 1% of the population. I'm not a religious show.
It's not just for Orthodox.
What I'm talking about is, and again, you're not really answering the question. You're saying,
but again, she's like, well, I'm not really religious. Well, it doesn't matter, right? It would be the equivalent of saying this. If Andrew comes on the show and he's a big fitness expert and his videos are working out at the gym and how to eat healthy, right? You know? And she comes in and she's like, oh, okay, I want to talk about like, you know, how to make men happier. And Andrew's like, eat right, exercise, take care of yourself. And she'd say, well, I'm not really a fitness channel. Okay, but sure. But you asked him to describe, or you brought him on to have this discussion, and you knew that he was going to discuss what he feels would be the best system that we could embrace. And he's providing descriptions. He's providing proof. Now, you might say, but I don't believe his proof. Fine, but Pearl's not challenging it. She's not saying, I don't believe those studies that you're talking about. I don't believe it. Let me see them. Let me go through those. She's not saying that. She's just saying, oh, you say that married men have more money, but why? Okay, well, why does the why matter? You say that prenups 90% of the time work. Okay, but it's non-responsive to what Andrew's saying. She's just like, well, I don't want you to talk about religion. I mean, think about this. It's sort of I hate to bring my friends, the ANCAPs, in this, right? But it's like if I host a debate panel and I invite Fabian Liberty and Casimir, two of my friends that are ANCAPs, on, right? And I say, you know, what should we do about tariffs? And they're like, okay, well, here's what we think about tariffs as ANCAPs. And I'm like, whoa, I'm not an ANCAP channel. I don't want you to be talking about that. But that's who they are. Their prescriptions and the data that they're citing about that is because that's the beliefs they sincerely have. And they're not just saying, I feel this, just like Andrew's not saying this. He's not making a claim like, I just feel it would work better. He's saying, here's the data. And she's like, well, I don't want to look at that data because that's Christian. And I don't want to talk about Christianity. But that's not really an argument. Now, she later starts to make arguments that are actually against this, in the sense it's sort of a non sequitur, but at least it's getting to Andrew's worldview of Christianity, where she says, well, I don't think you should call people degenerates. Who are you to mock their sin? Okay, that's at least an offensive position against his religious worldview, albeit not really in the confines of talking about men's happiness in marriage. But
you might get your kids.
No, what I'm saying is that by every single conceivable metric which is available for men, what is considered the loneliness epidemic, or the number one reported mental health issue for men, is that they're lonely. They feel lonely.
Right.
If that is the case, and loneliness goes away when they get married, then it seems like what would be really good for men would be to get married in a good, stable relationship. Your counter is
that's what the data that I'm talking about seems to show. Your risk of suicide basically doubles if you never get married as a man. That might be because of loneliness, or it may be because of over promiscuity, and which can also lead to loneliness, right? Loneliness isn't just, oh, I literally am not having sex with anyone, or I'm literally not interacting with anyone. It's the lack of meaningful interactions. And I've talked to, again, this is anecdotal, but I think the data brings this up as well, though I don't have it at my fingertips. A lot of people feel very hollow. They think that having sex with multiple partners will somehow satiate this need for human connection that they have. But ultimately, a lot of times people are left feeling hollow. I'm not saying that that's universal, by the way. There are always exceptions to the rules. You may be watching right now and say, I'll never get married. I'm the happiest dude. I got a bunch of cool stuff because I don't have kids, so I have a nice new motorcycle and a nice new truck, and I bang a bunch of chicks and I love it. Maybe that works for you as an individual. Just like there might be a guy here saying, I'm a heroin junkie and I love it. I'm able to function. I'm not in prison. I haven't got any disease through intravenous needle use. I think it's great. It feels wonderful. Maybe that works. But on the whole, on the average, it's clear that that's not working out for the majority of people that engage in those sorts of lifestyles. No, Overlord, you're wrong. You say actually married men have a higher suicide rate. They are single when they die of divorce. The suicide rates that I was talking about was comparing married men to men that were never married. So it wasn't comparing married men to just single men, including men that had formerly been married but were now single. Your risk of suicide doubles compared to a married man who is still married. It doubles if you never get married, not if you get married and get divorced.
But there's not that many marriageable women.
Correct.
But there's never always.
I know, but you agree with that, right? So most men aren't getting a marriageable woman.
That may be true, but it defines on how you define marriageable, one. Second, the way we increase the amount of marriageable women is to have cultural changes by having both men and women embrace the sort of mindsets that we're talking about. For me, I think the number one problem with why women aren't marriageable, or for that matter, men aren't marriageable material, is because of the cultural shift that we've had. Not only just this free love movement, but actually I think it's something more fundamental than that. And that is an embracement of sort of a materialist sort of mindset. If culture shows that the value in life is accumulating the most things, then it will almost never be of value to get married and have kids. Because most of the time what happens is, as an individual, particularly an individual man, it does not increase your monetary value. And the excesses that you would get with that monetary value, doing things, going on vacation, right? Going to the bar, buying a car, all of the likelihood of those things occurring once you're married and have kids decrease. So if we want to make more, quote, marriageable people, well, then what we need to do is change the culture. But even aside from that, it is not the black pill that people will have you believe that it's like, well, if you're a dude out there, there's only like 5 women in the whole country that are worth marrying. And Andrew will get to this argument later. It's a threshold. You can't put your finger on, say, if a woman specifically wants, like if you make it as simple as like, it's not worth marrying a woman that has too many intercourse or too many sexual relationships. Well, how many exactly? Could you marry a woman who slept with one guy? Okay, I guess. How about 2? Yeah, sure. How about 3? I guess. How about 4? How about 5? How about 6? 7. 7's the key number, right? It's not that simple. Pearl will later talk, and in fact, I'll play this. I think she gets to it here.
Most men never got one.
Right. So most men, it's not, marriage isn't for them.
Yeah, but you can't create the
Like
conditionals.
most men,
Yeah.
like if like out of 2 men or 10 men, over 6 aren't going to get a good deal, right?
But they never did. They never got.
But again, if that's true, that there's only enough for 4 to get married, but the data seems to suggest that the preferable way to live life is to get married, then what you should do is maximize your chance to get married and mitigate the risk of it. So societally, we try to change the laws, we try to change culture to make marriage more desirable for men and for women. But individualistically, what you try to do is say, I'll be one of the good. It'd be the equivalent of saying this, right? Like, well, there's only 10% of the jobs are good jobs, so never get a job. Don't worry about trying to improve yourself to get that good job because it's only 10% of the people that'll get it. Okay, then work even harder to get that good job.
Got a good deal.
So are you telling them to take a bad deal?
No, what I'm telling them specifically is very simple. That the historic fact of the matter is that most men never got to reproduce at all.
Right.
Your chances of reproduction now are way higher than ever. And the reason the sex drive is so high for men is because it's a biological imperative for reproduction. Otherwise, you wouldn't get a boner and want to go have sex, right? Especially not with good-looking, younger-looking women. That's the whole point of it. If you want stability in society, which is good for men, you want stability against degeneracy, which is also very good for men, then you want stable marriages for men.
What does society give men in return for producing a stable society? What do they give men in return?
I mean, again, a stable society, right? Like, she looks at it through, and I understand why she's doing this. She's saying, like, Andrew's like, well, one of the things that happens if we get married, if more people are getting married in good marriages, is we have a more stable society. And Pearl's looking at it through the lens like, but let's just say you're like some selfish dude and you're like, I don't care about all that. I don't care about society at all. What do I get out of it? Well, it's like, okay, so what do any of you that are watching are men or me? What do we get out of a stable society? We get a stable society. Living in a stable society is far more preferable by every metric than living in an unstable society.
Well, society never gave men anything for the production of stable societies.
Fine, but I'm asking today, what do they give them in return?
Yeah, I mean,
do they treat them well?
What men get in exchange for having a stable society is they get a stable society. That's the exchange. That's always been the exchange. Like, historically, men have always been fodder. They've always been war fodder. They've always been basically...
Right, and so think about it. Like, think historically how this would work. What are the benefits if you have a society that's strong and it's not involved in war and conflict all the time and it's stable? Well, then the men who are the ones that predominantly have to fight in the war and conflict, or if there's crime, etc., that are ones that are predominantly the victims of that stuff, they're not dying. They're not forced to fight to maintain control over that stable society. Their sanity and their mental health is better because they're not always on edge because of these things, etc. It's sort of it answers itself. Like, what do we get? What do men get out of a stable society? The same thing that women and children get out of a stable society. A stable society. By definition, it's beneficial for most people. Now, I suppose you could say, well, it's not really by definition, because if you're the type of man that thrives on chaos and you just want to be like a total Conan the Barbarian type, then yes, maybe a stable society is not preferable. But most men aren't going to fit that criteria, even if men would thrive more in that system than women. Overarchingly, it's better for men as a whole, just like women and children, to have stable societies.
Be treated poorly. But the idea here that we have to make perfect conditionals for marriage absent any risk or mitigating risk is silly. That's impossible no matter what.
If men keep getting married, what is the incentive for the laws to change? Where is the
incentive?
Not.
Well, hang on.
Well, but the status quo is already proving that. So the laws are changing, right? So Andrew's already said that actually men are getting custody more. So there's already brief changes. And even through like changes that you see that are anti-DEI, we already see laws changing that maybe the DEI laws favored women over men. And you could already see those laws start to change, right? So even with men getting married, those things are occurring. Also, it seems to be sort of not really directly responsive, right? Men getting married and continuing to engage in the institution of marriage, even if we say that there is a disadvantage in the legal system to men and that we want to change those laws because they're disadvantageous to men when it comes to merit laws surrounding marriage, like custody, alimony, divorce, et cetera, that doesn't mean that independent of that, men can't push or not push. Like, I don't understand why. Like, it's almost like, well, the men that are getting married, because they're married already, they no longer have a voice to push for the change of laws. Once you get married, you sign off on, oh, never mind, now the voice can't be changed. It's just sort of irrelevant. It's like the point she's making, I don't see any connection whatsoever to if 100% of men if every man in this country and 50% of the women said, we think that divorce laws are biased and they're not good and they're unfavorable towards men and we need to change it. The likelihood of that being changed if only 10% of men are married versus if 90% of men are married seem to be indifferent. I don't see the connection.
They can still get married absent the state, and that would still create conditionals for the laws to change.
If men keep having children, what is the incentive for society to give them fairer laws?
Same problem here. If men have children, it'd be the equivalent of saying if men keep watching football, then what's the incentive for them to save for retirement? What?
Well, what do you mean? If they have children and there's prenuptial agreements in place, women now have incentive to not destroy their own financial security for the future.
But again, so you're saying, well, she won't completely ruin your life, right? You're not saying a reward.
Yeah, but let's start with the fact that
like you get enthusiastic sex with a hot wife.
Now she misrepresents him. She says, "Oh, you're just saying with the prenup she won't ruin your life. You won't get a reward." Let me ask the audience. What do men get out of marriage? Andrew's already said it. Several times we've talked about it. Remember, she interrupted him when he started to explain. But he said it twice now. She's asked, and he's given the answer twice. No, it's not just that the prenup, well, that just means that you get less likely to get screwed over. That's the only benefit you get. No. It is true that the prenup itself makes it less likely to get screwed over, but there is the benefit of being married in the first place, provides a family, a mother, an intact family unit, children. In addition to, it seems to provide increased happiness based on the metrics that we can see. All right, it's time to grift. We're going to get back to the debate here in a minute, but I see I got some super chats that are coming in, so we're going to read them. I'm trying to get better watching other streamers having to grift more, so send me your damn money. This is my full-time job now, so everyone's incredibly generous. It's one of the worst things I do. I'm very bad at grifting. Very, 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 very bad. So please, don't make me beg. Don't make me early he boy on it. Send a boy another $100. You already sent him $50. Why not send him $100? Let the damn boy have his $100. All right, John Locke, thanks so much for the $10. Says, Pearl is a fading 3, trying to convince men that women are bad to hide the fact that she's a 3 to sleep with men. Maybe. Alan Hatz, thanks so much for being a new member. Really appreciate it. John Rock for $2 says, my bad, need sleep, up 37 hours. Keep streaming up. Thanks, John, man. Get some sleep. Robert Whaley, always incredible generous. Gifts 5 memberships. Thank you so much. Naughty Germ for $5. Thank you. Always generous as well. Thanks so much, Naughty. Drunk Batman, how you doing? $20. Thank you. It was good to hear from you earlier today, too. Thanks for everything you do. Says, just showing support for the channel. Thanks, Drunk Batman. Robert Whaley, another 5 gifted memberships, followed by Drunk Batman. A little tick for tat here. Thank you. Jimothy for $10. Says, glad to see you got hired by the Crucible, Rob. You deserve any and all success you find. Here's to future content. Don't give these libs an inch. Not one step back. Thank you, man. Happy to be working with the Crucible. Absolutely. Thanks so much. Jess Gerald, $50. Thank you so much. Always incredibly generous, Jess Gerald. Says, shh, don't tell Andrew. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. Always do. Alan Atz for $5 says, but I want you to beg. I have my dignity. Not much, but I have a little bit of dignity left, so we're not going to do terrible begging tonight. Not yet, anyways. Not quite dead for $5. Thank you again, man. Says money. We'll take it. Ken for $10 says family. Dom Toretto enters the chat. Anything for family. Thanks so much, man. Appreciate it. You guys are the best. You're incredibly generous. I really appreciate it. Going to make a go of this streaming stuff. We're eventually going to pick up. We're going to get bigger. But I'm enjoying doing this as well. I got some debates lined up here. I'll be debating Friday about trans issues. That's great. That's for the millionth time. So that'll be fun. But it should be fun. So, all right, let's jump back into the debate. Now, just because we're ending the grift section here, and I know I don't grift as well as Andrew and everyone else. He'll squeeze it out of you. We're gonna keep waiting. We're gonna wait to get back to the content. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna do that. Not today, anyways. But I do need to get better at it. But thank you all so much. I appreciate it. Now, having said that, you can keep giving money. I'll keep taking it while we're going here. So,
but there's a lot of you missed the point though that there's a lot of marriages that work.
Statistically,
what about the fact
true.
that there's so many marriages that work?
Statistically, that's just not true.
Well, okay, let's look.
She's factually wrong. Again, of men over the age of 20, according to the government census in 2021, only 33% that had ever been married had been divorced. If you're over 20 years old and you've ever been married, only 33% of all men in the United States had been divorced. That implies 77% of men are at least in marriages that didn't result in divorce. When he says all he said was he made a very general statement. He said there are a lot of marriages that are successful. She says that's just not true, statistically not true. Where are her statistics? I haven't heard her provide those that show that the vast majority of marriages end in divorce or poorly in some way.
Look at the statistics since you want to bring them up.
Go ahead.
You're looking at an estimate of 40%. 40% of the marriages are failing. Okay. The vast majority of them.
Again, 40% of marriages fail, but that's because some men get divorced multiple times. So when it comes to a better metric to look would be the individual men that have had successful marriages. Of men that get married, 67% have never been divorced. So just because there's one guy out there that's been divorced 13 times and that bumps up the number of how many marriages end in divorce, 67% of men are in marriages that didn't result in divorce. Their outcomes by almost every metric are superior to men that never got married. So if you're just looking at the data and you're saying, okay, I have a 67% chance to have outcomes that are twice as good if I get married, but I have a 33% to have outcomes that are twice as bad if I get married and get divorced. You'd be a fool on the average. You would take that bet every time. 2-to-1 odds to have better outcomes. To be fair, that number's probably on the decline. I don't know. I haven't looked. Actually, it seems like there are less divorces that are occurring, but I don't know if, as they said that number, I don't know if that means that less percentages of marriages are ending in divorce.
Them are still not, and as less people get married, those marriages are actually working out longer.
What is the obesity rate in America?
Oh, it's overwhelming for men and women.
Okay. Are most men this enormous risk and responsibility for a fat wife?
No.
Okay.
So I disagree. Well, the term most is doing a lot of work here, right? But nonetheless, right? If I'm a fat guy and my appearance is only a 4 out of 10, would I be happy to take on a wife that objectively would have an appearance of like a 4 out of 10? Maybe. Compared to what? The alternative? Being alone? So yes, is it true that if everyone was healthier and if you could create a society and everyone's a 10 out of 10 and perfectly healthy and financially stable, etc., would that maximize happiness in marriages amongst people? Yes. Is it true that some people have physical preferences that are like once people cross a certain threshold, I've done that before, certain threshold of what I consider to be unattractive, then it's not worth trying to enter into a monogamous. Of course that's true. But the idea that it's just like, well, if a woman's chubby, no one's ever going to want to marry her is not true. Or obese, let's say. It's not true. Now, do the majority of women want to marry someone, or men want to marry a woman that's obese? Probably not. But again, I guess, what do you expect? If you yourself are, hypothetically, if 70% of men and 70% of women are obese, I suppose it's entirely possible that obese men are like, nah, dude, I don't want to marry an obese woman. Sure, possible. But again, I think that Pearl is only looking at the negatives. Let me ask you this. Is it possible to marry a woman who is obese as a man and have her be a great mother and have her provide children for you and have her be a loving wife? Sure. All of that's possible. If those things have more value than material concerns, and they may have more value than physical attractiveness. Now, having said that, because sex is a biological need and it would intuit that you would want to be attracted to your partner, maybe you never get to that point where you have a loving wife because there's a level of attractiveness that must be met for each individual before those other things are possible, because you're just so physically repulsed or unattracted that you wouldn't try to enter a monogamous relationship anyways. But that's sort of a problem with the status quo anyways. For example, if I could convince you, an individual out there, that this woman that you're looking at who's obese would be an excellent mother, an excellent wife, just a great in every other metric except that she's obese. And you would say, well, I would have sex with her. I wouldn't marry her, but I'd have sex with her. Because there's clearly a lot of guys, if the majority of the country's obese, I think, I could be wrong, but according to Pearl, all the stats are even underselling women's body count. So someone's sleeping with these women. So if you're willing to sleep with them and you could guarantee that they would be great wives, etc., great mothers, then the argument of, but you're physically repulsed by them seems to go out the window.
So again, you have to answer the question, what's in it for
I'm
guys?
answering the question. So what's in it for men?
Right.
It's the third time she's asked the question, what's in it for men? Andrew's answered every time.
Is the only thing that's ever been in it for men.
Yeah.
Family.
Yeah, and I don't think it's going to be a good enough answer. If you're right,
Why?
then men are going to sign up to get married. You don't have to convince me.
Yeah, but what about
Well, that's true. We don't have to convince Pearl. And yes, it is a tough sell. Culture has ingrained in people sort of materialistic pursuits. So yeah, it's really hard. For example, let's take having a family, having children out of it. If I said to you, you want to be a volunteer coach for youth sports, and your goals that you're looking at in life's like, I want to get a great career, I want to buy a car, I want to go on vacation. How does volunteering for youth sports help achieve those goals? Probably doesn't. And you could make an argument that maybe you make connections, but in general, it wouldn't. So would you do it? Probably not. But if I said, but there is inherent value outside the scope of just financial wealth and materialism that comes with working with kids and helping them. Yeah, it would be a difficult sell to the majority of people that are like, it doesn't sound interesting to me. I don't see what that value would be. Not for me. But those that you can reach would be benefited. Similarly here. Maybe it's true that we won't be able to, in the short term, convince people that having children and having a loving wife and having a mother, marrying a mother that takes care of your children is the peak value of what you should be looking for. You're right. That's tough to convince people. I try. But that doesn't mean that it's still not worth trying to convince them. And when the alternative that seems to be offered by Pearl, we've already talked about this. She's saying, I'm not offering an alternative. So then basically it's the status quo. What's that look like? Incels? Andrew Tate, just go out and bang as many chicks as you can? That's right. Just give up. You know, just be miserable. It is nihilism. It's just black-pilled.
Like the qualifiers of men have to live in this world.
Right.
We have to live in this world. We live in a world full of degeneracy and basically horrifying things because of the instability of society. And you almost disempower them in a way because you're saying they don't have the power to change the nature of law.
I just want them to make an informed decision.
Yeah,
that's it.
But I mean,
I disagree. Or let me put it this way. I either think that she's wrong, that she actually has a bias, and it's not she has one way that she wants to push men, which is not get married. Or if she just wants men to make an informed decision, then she's doing them a disservice by only telling one side of the story. Here's the dangers of getting married. Not here's the dangers of not getting married. Not here's the benefits of getting married. How do you think you're doing a service of giving data to have someone make an informed decision if you're only, if I say, for example, if I say, hey, are you going to buy a Ford or are you going to buy a Dodge? I'm not trying to sway either way. I just want you to make an informed decision. Now, here's 100 reasons that the Ford sucks. I just want you to make an informed decision. You'd be like, well, you going to talk about the Dodge at all? No. I'm not offering a prescription. I'm just saying Ford sucks. But I'm not telling you. I'm not pushing you one way or another. I just want you to be informed. Well, can you tell me some facts about, is there anything good about the Ford, right? Has it won any awards? Like, anything? No, I'm not going to talk about anything good about the Ford. Just the bad shit about the Ford. Okay, anything about the Dodge? No, nothing about the Dodge. I just want you to be informed. That's what she's doing. Like, for example, when Andrew's like, well, family, and he tries to describe why that's important, and she sort of, cuts him off, and then he says again, she's like, I'm not impressed. She's not even trying. She's not saying, well, why don't you talk about that a little? Can you explain to the audience out there, how would you weigh sort of the risk of what could financially harm you if you get married, particularly if you end up in divorce? And it could cause emotional distress. How would you weigh the benefits of having a family? Can you describe some of that? She's not doing that. She's just like, I'm not impressed. I don't think dudes will buy that.
The informed decision towards what? Had their happiness?
Whatever they want to do. It's not my place to tell
well,
men.
Do you think they want to be happy?
It's not my place to tell men how to live.
Well, do you think they want to be happy, though?
Well, I think that happiness is a feeling that comes and goes. So I don't really...
See, this is what I'm talking about, the frustration of this. This is some real, like, debate bro stuff. You just can't give an answer. Like, how hard would it be? Like, sure, I want men to be happy and make the decisions that are best for them. How hard is that?
Really?
So you don't want them to be happy?
I think
you just want to do what they want?
No, I didn't say that. I said it's a feeling that comes and goes.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
I don't think studies
I would think ultimately you would want men happy, right?
I want them to do what they want to do.
Okay, well, do you think that most men want to be happy?
I'm not a preacher channel, right? I'm not here to tell you how to live.
I'm not saying that you're a preacher. I'm not preaching. Right now, I'm just talking about the facts. The facts of the matter are, don't you think men want to be happy?
Well, if marriage makes them happy, then I'm sure they'll sign up. I'm sure the marriage rates will go up.
Yeah, that's not an answer to the question.
Again, this sort of argument, well, if men want to be happy and marriage makes you happier, then more men will get married. But again, if I could ask Pearl, do you think people would be happier if they weren't obese? She'd probably, if she wasn't like debate throwing it, say, sure, they'd be physically healthier, they'd be more active, they'd be more attractive, more opportunities open for them, probably better mental health as a result. Sure. Right? Okay, well, if that's true, then why are so many people obese? If you're right that not being obese would make you better, that more people would prefer, and it would make you happy, then surely we'll see a lot of people not being obese now. Well, no, because there's a lot of things that could go into that. You may not know that it makes you happy. You may give in to slothfulness, greed, other things, other sort of sinful behavior. You might have other priorities. But the idea of, because in effect, the logical extension of Pearl's argument here is, well, then the way society is maximum benefit to people because it'll sell itself and people will always do what's best for them. So whatever they're doing is best for them. That means if 80% of people are obese, fine, that's what's best for them. That's what makes them happy. That's what they want. And so therefore, there's no point ever discussing what is good and what is bad because it is just what is. People inherently will make the right choice to do whatever's best for them and whatever they prefer. And so there's no use discussing whether or not that's good or not. It's just the way it is. So now, if people are convinced to have materialistic beliefs as the foundation for their values, but objectively they would be happier to become Christian or to get families or to have children, the fact that they don't do that isn't proof that they would be happier or healthier. That's not proof of that.
I asked, sure. The question I asked specifically is, do you think men want to be happy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if you think that men want to be happy, and if we look at all of the data that we can possibly find on male promiscuity and happiness, it doesn't look very good for them. Okay. So even if it were the case that you advocate against marriage, which is fair, especially secular marriage,
I don't advocate against marriage. I see it. I see it disappearing from the middle class completely. I see it just becoming something that the rich do. And I see the birth rates continuing to decline, and I see marriage going away because people like you can't give men good answers on why they get married.
He doesn't even get an opportunity. When he tried to explain, she cut him off. And then when he says, well, marriage and stuff, she's not interested. She jumps on to the next question. Now, granted, maybe you could argue Andrew could have done a better job articulating it, right? But again, even the most skillful rhetorician, it's difficult to explain. I could have had my friends that had kids tell me until they were blue in the face how wonderful having children was and how it was the greatest feeling in the world and how it was beyond anything they thought possible in sort of happiness and value and meaning in life. They could have talked until they were blue in the face, and until I had a kid, I never would have understood. Ever. It would be impossible for me if you don't have a loving wife and you don't have a child who's healthy. Now, listen, I understand things get difficult. If there are external challenges such as significant health problems or financial problems that mean that you can't provide for the wife or the child, that's different. That could be misery. I am not, but to be as lucky as I am, there is no feeling in the world that is remotely compared from the bottom of my heart. But how do you're just like, yeah, okay, sure. It's stupid, but I know people talk about pet ownership. The logical extrapolation of Pearl's argument, which is, well, actually, even if getting married is better, getting divorced is worse than if you wouldn't have been married in the first place because suicidality numbers go up. Okay, well, I looked into this. Although the data is not directly comparative, I think that an extrapolation of it shows that your suicidality actually goes up near the same, if not more, if your spouse dies. which would make sense, right? You're in a loving relationship, your spouse tragically dies, you're more likely to self-harm. But does that mean that you should have never entered that marriage? Or if you want to reduce it to the sort of pet argument, I just had a wonderful dog named Annabelle who was like 13, 14 years old, who passed away. It hurt a lot. It really did. But should I have never got her then? The 14 years of great times I had with that dog wasn't worth it because of the pain I experienced at the end? It seems as if there is a resignation and a sort of nihilism to what Pearl is suggesting. I think she overstates the chance of having a successful, or how small the chance of having a successful relationship is. I think she's wildly inaccurate about that. But she allows the fear of that unsuccessful relationship to say, therefore, you shouldn't risk getting into a relationship. Sure, maybe good things could happen if you get into a positive relationship, but it could always end poorly, so don't even bother. And she'll say, well, no, I'm not describing that. I'm just saying you're not offering any prescriptions of what that good is. But we are. She doesn't want to hear it, and I'll admit it's hard to quantify. Would you rather make twice as much money at your career or have a loving wife and child? It's real easy for you to be like, well, if I made twice as much money, here's what I could do. But what does having a loving wife and child, how do you evaluate that? You can't go on Amazon and say, oh, a loving wife and child, that'll buy me this new lawnmower that I was looking for. It's difficult to compare those things. But I think that it is absolutely true that the values of those things, of having a loving wife and child and having health, and far outweighs. Overlord keeps saying your odds are off. Show me other data. Let's see the data. I'm providing data. Do you have data that suggests that more than 33% of men have been divorced that have been married? Do you have that data? Do you have the data on suicidality rates comparatively between men in marriages that haven't been divorced versus men that never got married? Let's see the data. I'm willing to have people present other evidence. Pearl's not presenting it. The only person that seemed to suggest like data on the success of marriages seemed to be Andrew. Granted, he was talking in a hyper-specific, the marriages he's talking about. That's right, not quite dead. Even with the failed marriage, positive things can happen. I happen to know several people who got divorced and still were loving parents to their child and thought it was absolutely worth it and worked together amicably in raising that child, even in a broken family. And they would both say that it was worth that. Okay, Overlord's pretty aggro here. Blah, 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 magic, blah, blah, blah. You are saying no data, duh. Pretty intelligent gentleman we have here. Okay. 2017 meta-analysis in social science and medicine reported that married men have significantly lower suicide rate, a hazard ratio of 0.5 to 0.7 compared to never married men, with protective factors like spousal support, shared responsibilities. Abstract, marital status, integration, and suicide, a meta-analysis of meta-regression. Abstract. Marital status is an index of a phenomenon of social integration with social structures has been long identified as an important predictor of suicide. However, previous meta-analysis have focused on only a particular marital status or not sufficiently explored moderators. A meta-analysis of observational studies was conducted to explore the relationships between marital status and suicide and to understand the important moderating factors in this association. Electronic databases were searched to identify studies conducted between January 1st, 2000 and June 30th, 2016. We performed a meta-analysis, subgroup analysis, and meta-regression of 170 suicide risk estimates from 36 publications. Using Raymond effect model with adjustment for covariates, the study found that the suicide risk for non-married men was 1.92% higher than those that were married. Notice what that says? For non-married versus married. In other words, people that were never married. The suicide risk was higher for non-married individuals 65 than those under 65, and higher for men than women. Okay? So, not men that were never married, non-married men, suicide rate much higher. What percentages of how many men that have been married are no longer married? Census Bureau, April 22nd, 2021. The U.S. Census Bureau today said the number of time the report uses data from the 2016 American Community Survey. Among ever married adults 20 years and over, 14% of women have ever been widowed compared to 6%. Wait, that's not the one I was looking for. Among ever married adults 20 years and over, 34% of women and 33% of men had ever been divorced. Can you provide your data now? Can you provide your data? Okay. He says, I needed BTO that's slower, so you can't be trusted. Goodbye. Proceeding?
Okay.
Should accumulate that risk.
What did men ever get?
You're saying risk 40% of your income for 18 years. If you have 2+ children, the woman can take you to court and take 40% of your income. It's not that every woman will. It's that every woman can. As soon as you enter into a marriage contract, she has the leverage.
Now answer my question. What did men ever get out of marriage? What did men ever get out of marriage?
I don't really care about what they got in the past.
Answer my question. What did they ever get out of marriage? But I don't care
because I'm talking about the facts
I don't care
today.
if you don't care. Answer the question. What did men ever get out of marriage?
I don't care.
Well,
it's about like because
and the reason Andrew's making this claim is because it's like if we say that, like, she seems to be making this proclamation that things have changed now. Women are more promiscuous, blah, 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 blah. But Andrew's like, well, you keep like reducing it to what do men get? What do men get? And the reason Andrew's saying what did men ever get is because she's not accepting the idea of family. She's just like, nah, no one's gonna buy that. It's not. You're not gonna convince men with that argument. And then Andrew's like, well, how would you convince them 100 years ago? I don't know. And the point he's trying to make is like, well, listen, men are getting the same things today, roughly, out of marriage that they wanted to get 100 years ago. Children, families, loving wives and mothers. That's what they're getting. By the way, Roman, I'll be happy to see your data. The data I suggested was from the CDC census that said 33% of men that had ever been married over the age of 20 had been divorced. You seem to suggest that 40 to 50% of first-time marriages end in divorce. That would seem to suggest that the data that I'm suggesting is wrong. But I'd be happy to see it. Proceeding.
We have to operate. We have to operate
for marriage.
Like what does a guy care about what happened 100 years ago? He cares about the decisions he has to make today.
Yeah, I know, but
and he has to use the fact.
Which may be true, but the reason that Andrew is making this claim is to show that, like, there was a point where it was highly desirable for men to get married, but the criticism that you're making now, saying, oh, if it's just about family, men ain't going to buy that. But they did buy that back then. In other words, she keeps saying the answers you're giving aren't real answers. They're not real answers. What do you mean kids? What do you mean family? That's not a real answer. And Andrew's like, oh, okay, then what's changed? If it was a real answer previously, what's your answer to previously why they wanted married? And she doesn't have one. She's like, I don't care.
Question avoiding machine.
No,
so
you want me to do what you do, which is prescribe. I don't prescribe.
I'm not even asking for prescriptions. Okay. I'm asking right now for a description. What did men ever get out of marriage? What?
Yeah, well, I can think it's a stupid question. So like,
I
don't think it matters.
What did they ever get out of it? Ever?
I don't know. Tell me.
You don't know.
No, go ahead. No, tell me.
They got the same thing I'm prescribing, which is a family. That's the what else would the incentive ever be?
And again, if that's so great, then men will sign up. If that's great.
So like if I've already dealt with that. Like, no, if losing weight's so great, then people will lose weight. Well, no, not necessarily, but it's objectively great.
If a product's good, there's a big demand, right?
Mm-hmm. There is a big demand. Men want to get married.
Sure. Then
yeah, but
if they wanted to, they would, right?
When we talk past each other is like, if if you describe all the issues, that's fair, right? But the description of the issue is supposed to be for the purpose of what men do best, which is solving the issue. I don't mind you giving all the descriptors. I think that's great. Okay. But the idea of like, Andrew, what do men get right now? That's not a good enough reason. What did men ever get out of it? It's the same reason. It must be the best reason.
Then run for office. Run.
I mean, I would much rather fund NGOs so that I could get people in key positions to change law. But the same principle.
Go do it.
But what I'm saying to you is like, from a descriptive.
I mean, again, this is sort of a snarky smother. Well, if you believe that, run for office. Well, what does running for office, again, yes, you could change laws. Certainly, right? But it seems that a big portion of this is cultural, right? And Pearl's going to say, like, later in the debate, I don't know if we'll get to it because I don't know how late I'll stay here tonight, but she's going to say later in this debate, like, how, you're sort of offensive that you're telling men how they ought to live and you're shaming them. That's a claim she'll make. But what? It's okay to do that if you're a congressperson? What exact law is she recommending other than switching divorce laws? It just seems like a snarky comment, like, oh, okay, dude, if you think having kids is so great, then become a congressman and tell people to have kids. Wait, what?
Standpoint.
But that's
I am
the point.
Like I have been doing it.
Okay, then I'm sure there'll be great change in the next 10 years.
Well, we're gonna try,
and
right?
I'll be completely wrong.
Yeah, but I mean, the trends.
Again, it's just sort of snarkiness for the sake of it. I mean, literally, the implication of what she's saying here is, if some health guy came on and was like, hey, you should eat right, you should exercise, she'd be like, okay, then I'm sure we'll see a decline in obesity rate. If you're right that it's healthy to lose weight, if you're right, I'm sure that's what we'll see. I'm sure we'll see it. I guess I'll be wrong 10 years from now. Because if you're right that would be healthy and that would be better, then that's what people will do. It's just nonsensical.
The trends can continue to nosedive, but let's assume for a second that like it all nosedives. What does the future look like then?
Well, I don't think there'll be change until my prediction is we'll only see change when society crumbles enough for women to face the consequences of their decisions.
And what happens then?
Then there might be change. That's what I would predict. I would predict that things go down until things are falling apart enough, and then maybe there'll be a policy change. Maybe. Meaning that probably not.
Meaning we can fix the problems, right?
Not anytime soon.
No, but when we reach this like plateau.
Sure.
So then wouldn't it logically follow then that we should accelerate the decline as quickly as possible to reach that plateau to fix these things?
Sure. If that's sure.
So then that's an accelerationist mindset, right?
I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm saying I don't see them changing anytime soon. That's it. I don't. Yeah. I don't think in my lifetime there'll be major.
But ultimately,
changes.
Do you want to see them change?
It would be nice.
Yeah. So then if that.
But again, she says she seems to waffle on this, where she's like, "Oh, I'm not taking a stance on what's good and bad." And she's like, yeah, I'd like to see, do you want men to be happy? Oh, I don't know. Men should do what they want. But do you want this to change? Yeah, it would be nice.
If that's the case, I'll just assume the position for a moment, your position, just descriptors. Here's where we're going. It would still be really wise to have men's rights advocacy groups and things like this in place for this inevitable decline, so that those types of policies can then be pushed, so that we're like ready for them, right?
Sure, but the first one was in 1910, so I don't, if we're where we are today and the first one was over 100 years ago.
The first what? Policy?
No, the first men's right to advocate.
I mean, again, like what Andrew's saying is objectively true. Well, shouldn't groups of men come together to advocate for their rights? Even if you think that it's inevitable there'll be this decline, during the period of that decline, wouldn't it behoove men to come together and advocate for their rights? And she's like, wow, they did that in 1913. What did that do? Nothing. Okay, then don't come together. It won't accomplish anything. And I think that that's belied by the fact that there have been gains made in the men's right movement.
I think it was around 1910. I don't know the exact.
Yeah, but they were advocating for completely different things, right?
I mean, I saw ones about divorce law early in the 1900s. Off the top of my head, I don't know, but
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, divorce. It used to be we had coverture laws. So I mean, coverture laws basically, in that case, you had to have show cause in order to get divorced, and coverture laws, things like that. It was most of the early 1900s, I believe. So the thing that's interesting though is like,
my point is, I just don't see it being effective because the last 100 years it's gotten worse, not better. So why would I think? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. But I mean, so the thing is like things have gotten better. Abortion laws have been rolled back, right?
But Plan B's gone up.
True. Only in some states, though. I went and checked the stats on that as well.
Sex work has gone up too.
But you know what else is going down is female promiscuity and male promiscuity over time.
Right.
And what's interesting,
but STD rates are up. So,
but again, like she seems to be like, well, it's just black pill, nothing will ever work. And Andrew's like, well, some things are working. For example, we've made ground on abortion. Roe v. Wade got overturned. And she's like, yeah, but morning after pill, sure. But as far as a law, that's at least advocacy pushing for a political change that changed a law. My guess is, and I haven't delved into the data, that the decline in the amount of abortions since the overturning of Roe v. Wade has not broken even with the increase in the amount of Plan B. That's my guess. In other words, if we have 10% less abortions, I don't know that we have the exact equivalent more amount now of Plan B. I don't know that that's true. That's to not even get into discussions of if Plan B is less objectionable than later term abortions.
So how do you explain
because
that?
Sex work is up.
Okay, well, if that's not what the guys dating are saying, but okay.
Yeah, because they're dating women who have only, I mean, you're talking about like 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 now. It can have an OnlyFans. The sex work epidemic has exploded STDs. I mean, we can look at this objectively.
When's the last time you dated? Like, when's the last time you actually dated?
Oh, it's been fucking, I don't know, like, what, 17 years
so
or something?
So how do you think you know better than the guys dating? Like, what's out there?
I mean, when's the last time you dated?
Like a year ago? Okay,
so from your sample size, you think that in 17 years the marketplace for dating has changed so much that I'm not allowed to have any input in it?
Oh no, I just don't think you really know what's on the ground if you haven't done it in 17 years, because it's the advent of social media has changed the dating marketplace a lot, like a lot.
Yeah, why do you think? Wait a second, back up. I don't understand why you think that you couldn't have input and research the stat. I'm using the same stats you're using.
Yeah, it's an interesting, like she seems, and you'll start to see, she sort of has this approach like, well, I don't trust like almost any of the statistics that disagree with me. For example, statistics of how many people women sleep with, I don't trust those, right? And she's like, well, that's not what dudes are saying. That's not what dudes are saying. Dudes are saying that like these women are all hoes, so... When did you date last, Andrew? Oh, you don't know then. Women are all hoes now. And it's like, well, it's sort of like this sort of lefty argument where it's like, well, unless you know my subjective truth, I don't want to hear about data. I want to hear about that. It's just my subject. You don't know. You're not out there, so you can't see. Oh, okay.
Using. Like, it's not, and I have the same conversations with thousands of people you have, men and women both. The same exact,
Right.
like the same
I
amount of
just-
anecdotal
sorry.
evidence and statistics, right?
Sorry, what I could say, maybe a better way to say it is, I think it's like an oversimplification of the problem when you're saying, oh, it's just like bad women that these guys are dating. Like, I don't
No,
really think it's that
That's
simple.
not what I said at all.
Or it's
what
just,
I said
it's
is that
just
the
sex worker.
conditionals-
It's just sex worker women that these guys are dating, right?
No, that would account for one thing, STDs.
Okay.
The STD
correct
rates
me.
go
What
sky
did you?
high.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So what I said gave you was the answer that you're always looking for. The men get out of marriage same thing they always got out of it, a family. And why is it that men are always gravitating towards family? Well, it seems to be biologically hardwired in them because
It
they've
is.
always done that.
Sure, it is.
So if that's the case, their happiness levels intrinsically tied to that. It seems that if you wanted to advocate for men, then you would be advocating the most for the idea of keeping marriage sacrosanct and also making sure that these things got reformed as quick as possible.
Okay. If someone took your prescription, can you give me like step by step your prescription for how men,
Yes.
if to get married?
So again, like, I don't know if I think she brings up the STD thing later. But STDs actually are going to be an argument for Andrew. Because someone correct me if I guess there's three possibilities. Not getting married, but entering a monogamous relationship. Not getting married and basically eschewing women. Or not getting married and doing like the red pill, just have sex when you feel like it. Certainly, the amount of STDs will increase as non-monogamous relationships increase. So the idea of like, wow, there's STDs out there, so why would you want to get married? Well, you would have less of a chance to get the STD if you decide to have a monogamous relationship married with one woman as opposed to banging 10 a year. Now she asks for a step-by-step what Andrew's recommending. Now, again, it's interesting because she herself is unwilling to give any prescriptions, and she actually will criticize Andrew for trying to give prescriptions when she's not even asking for like a general outline of your prescription. She wants a step-by-step detail.
Stay married. What's your prescription?
First of all, I wouldn't say you keep on
Go
framing
ahead.
this as though I'm saying take a plunge when I'm not
No,
saying
it's
take
totally
a plunge.
fine. Tell me what's beginning
so
to end.
First,
so where should
first
they
of all,
where should they source?
I would look at these stats.
No,
A.
not the stats.
Again, Roman King, let's say that 7% of the population is virgin and of women. So who's telling you that you should remain a virgin for the female virgin population? You don't have to. You could go out and have sex with a bunch of people. What I'm telling you is, if your calculation is, what I want is to bang chicks. I just want to bang chicks. And I'm saying, I think there is higher value to that in life. I think getting married, having children, having a loving wife and a loving mother is more important than just your feeling of wanting to bang chicks. But if your value is, no, I really just want to bang a bunch of chicks. And if other chicks bang dudes, then I'm going to bang chicks because there's only 7% of women that aren't out there banging a bunch of dudes. So therefore, I'm not going to prevent myself. Okay, you don't have to do that. And if you decide then that you're never going to enter into a relationship, get married, have children, I think that the studies back up, not just the study, but anecdotal evidence back up that you will be less likely to be happy and fulfilled. I think that when you're an old man without children, with no one to love you because you decided that you just wanted to plow through 50, 60 chicks, you'll realize that that was fleeting and hollow and it doesn't leave you complete. Now, you can feel like a big man and say, but the chicks deserved it because they were sleeping with dudes too. So who are you to tell me that I should save myself? I'm not telling you to save yourself. In fact, if you went out and you banged a bunch of chicks and now you realize you want to settle down and get married, that's still preferable than just deciding that you want to keep banging chicks. However, maximum preferability would be for you to save yourself until marriage in the eyes of God, until it was with a woman you love, and hopefully you would find a woman that would do the same. The chances of you of finding that woman might be 7 out of 100, and maybe you're not a desirable enough man to be able to capture one of those 7. And I get that. I certainly am not that desirable myself. And it seems from the argumentations you've made in my chat before that when it comes to your personality, maybe you're not that desirable. So I get being angry about that because you're like, ooh, I can't compete. I'm not good enough to get one of those 7% of women. Totally cool. Totally understand that. Again, no one's telling you that you have to save yourself for a chaste virgin. That's fine. I think that you would be perfectly fine and happy to marry someone who has slept with people previously. That's okay too. There's probably a threshold. What I would recommend, as Andrew's going to say later in the debate, that as you increase that threshold, the likelihood of a successful outcome of having a good marriage decrease. But it doesn't mean that it's impossible. And certainly I'm not saying that you don't deserve happiness or the chance to get married or have children if you've slept with someone in the past. I'm not saying that. But there seems to be this sort of, well, if chicks are going to sleep with other dudes, then I'm not saving myself. No one's telling you have to. No one's saying that. No one's telling you to be a virgin. That's fine. You don't want to be a virgin? Go have sex. Do it. And then what? You can be like, I felt good. I did it. Oh, where are you going to be tomorrow? Okay. I didn't save myself for marriage. I didn't. And yet I found happiness. Have I become more religious within the last few years, or maybe since your son was born? Certainly in the last few years, and I think that my son being born has a huge amount to do with that. I would say that's true, but even before, I think as I got older, even before my son was born, I think I know this is cliche, but I think seeing the mortality of loved ones that I had made me think about sort of life in a scale that I hadn't been thinking of previously. So we'll continue.
Yeah.
Where should they source the women from? Like, what state should they go to? What church? I'm guessing you're going to say Orthodox.
Okay, so
But you can see she's being facetious. What state should I go to look for a woman? Now, I think Andrew, we're not going to get the whole way through this debate, right? This comes up a lot where Andrew starts to get a little perturbed that she keeps going, I want like the hyper specifics of what you would do, right? I think Andrew could outline more of a broader outline than he does, right? So he'll say like sign a prenup, like pre-mitigation. But the idea of like what state should you go get a woman? Andrew just gets flustered and goes, oh, you want me to give you, I'm not a dating coach. But here's some things that I would think reasonably that Andrew would agree with, and I'll give you of examples of how you would be most likely to find a loving partner, a loving wife that you could hopefully maximize your chance of having a marriage. The prenup thing's one thing. It's not the argument I'm making, but let's say for the sake of Andrew's argument that is effective, that increases your chance. Here's other things you could do. Number one, you could work on improving yourself, right? That means improving yourself physically, health-wise, spiritually, and in many other ways, right? So of course, I violate my own rules. I'm a fat, out of shape slob, right? But doing those things, making yourself more desirable and a better holistic person means that you have a better chance to desire a mate who has those same attributes that you find desirable. And so working on yourself is a big part of that. The second thing that I can recommend is trying to look for women in places that you'd be most likely to find a woman that shared your religious or cultural values. So you're probably not going to find a woman like that at a place like a bar, but you might find a woman like that at a place like some sort of social club that you're gathering in, or a place like church or some other event like that where you're meeting people. Third, have a big social network. I don't mean online. Have a lot of friends. A lot of people that have successful marriages end up having so because they meet someone through their friend group. And meeting someone through a friend group will solve a lot of the problems that Pearl's going to talk about later. Well, how do you know? How do you know if this woman's really not been a skank? How do you know that she's really not a crazy person? Well, it's true that you could never definitively know many of these types of questions about a person because you just don't know everything about their past. Chances are, if you meet this person through your social group, those in the social group would at least be somewhat aware of the type of person that the person you're meeting is. And so that increases your chance of it being someone that's compatible. The fourth thing you should do is you should try to present yourself in a way that is attractive to sort of the partner that you're seeking. So I would recommend sort of a courtship type period and not like jumping right into just intercourse, etc. Now, I don't think that it's necessary. Maybe you could certainly have a good marriage and not saved yourself for marriage. I did, right? But I think that it would be preferable because I think that ultimately, if you save yourself, that leads, and I think data seems to show this, the less that you've had sex leading into a marriage, the more likely your marriage is to stick out, right? And then I think that you should take your time and make sure that it's the right person for you, which means don't jump in and get married 2 months into it, 3 months into it, or something like that. And then furthermore, I would recommend that, you seek to have some sort of, I will say Christianity for me, but you have some sort of religious backing, and that you're getting married not just in the eyes of the state, but you're doing it because you're getting married in the eyes of a higher power, that you think there's just something more to it than that. Those are some recommendations that I would give. Roman King says 50% of a parachute will work while jumping off a plane. Who's going to take that jump? Just get a living girlfriend. If you get married, she'll take all your shit. Okay, but 100% chance that you're never happy if you don't jump off there. And it's not a 50% chance that the parachute won't open. It's a 50% chance that the parachute opens, but you sprain your ankle and have a bad time when it falls. You will never have kids. You'll never get married. You'll never have a loving wife. You'll never have a loving mother if you don't get married. And if you're religious, you certainly won't have those things in the eyes of God. The data I cited shows that your risk of suicide doubles if you're a never married person. Swirly says, Rob, it's really easy for someone in a loving relationship to say. That's true. Certainly, if you've been spurned or something like that, your subjective experience is going to be, well, this didn't work out for me. Absolutely true. But Swirly, if tomorrow you start to meet someone and you enter a loving relationship, does that mean that you all of a sudden realize that I was objectively right when you thought I was objectively wrong because I was coming from a subjective place when you first heard this? You would say, now I see. He is advocating for a change in the system. He also advocated for political changes and pushing for example, he talked about men's rights groups and wanting men's rights groups. He talked about the need for political change. He said that's one of the first things we need to do, try to change the lawful system, etc. He advocated for things like prenups, which is some sort of hedge against the unfair political circumstances when it comes to marriage. Thanks, EOD. I appreciate that.
So I'll answer your question, right? You're not going to find huge variances state by state.
Okay.
You're just not going to. Okay. But you can definitely upgrade the chances of you finding a woman who's not going to have these behaviors, which you and I would both consider non-optimal. Okay. So it wouldn't just be the Orthodox Church, Roman Catholic Church, and even Protestants, as long as the worship is more than one time per week, right? Their marriage rates significantly go down. If you get married as a virgin, you almost never get a divorce because your sample size is super low.
So are you saying they should find a virgin, or do you think that's realistic nowadays to find a virgin woman?
Yeah. No. I'm giving you a step-by-step prescription of all the things you can do to mitigate risk.
Right. No, but I'm not saying mitigate risk. I'm saying, do they download a dating app? Are they going to go on Instagram? How are they going to do it?
Okay.
Yeah.
So
go to
if
church.
You look, yeah. So I'll walk through it, right?
Okay.
But what we're talking about is risk mitigation. So let's start with risk mitigation.
But I want the dating process from beginning to end.
Oh, okay. We'll give.
Go ahead.
Lex Lives says, original link without this guy yapping. Yeah, try search engine. But I'll save you the trouble. There you go. Don't have to worry about my yapping anymore.
What? You want me to give a dating process from beginning
Yeah.
to end for every individual man on planet Earth?
Well, okay, if a guy wants to go on your prescription.
No, the dating process is going to be
How is he going to
varied
source women?
on region. It's going to be varied on man. It's going to be varied on what options are available. But what you can look at is all the signs of the universals which mitigate risk. What you're asking is for an absurdity. It's like me asking, tell me step by step, how do I become a successful podcaster?
Oh,
every man, every woman on earth.
I think there's like something being lost in the conversation here. I don't know how unreasonable Pearl's being with here. If I look at it in the best light of Pearl, she's just saying like, well, no, can you outline like some of the steps that you would take? Like, would you look online? Would you just say, look for women at church? That sort of thing. Andrew's looking at it like she's saying, walk me step by step. How many times would you meet? Where would you take her to dinner? And he's like, that's unreasonable. So I'm not sure what the truth is in here, but you can see that it does appear unreasonable on her part, but I'm trying to be open-minded here. Maybe it's me also failing the communication here.
Actually, how do you become a successful
I could do that
podcaster?
I could do that pretty easily.
Do it.
I could do no, but I asked you first, and you don't have an answer because you don't have
it's an impossible question.
No, it's actually pragmatic because if you have a real,
it's not even pragmatic.
If you have a real plan for men, you have to have a step by step. Like, what's step one?
Yeah, so step one would be looking at the mitigation for risk. That would be step one.
But you have to get a girl on a date first before you even get there.
No, you don't have to get a girl on a date to mitigate risk, bro.
Okay, well, I guess there's no risk if you never get on the date.
Yeah, that's right. So the thing is, if you're talking about
if we're talking about
mitigation,
where is he sourcing the women from? Instagram?
You're asking for stuff. Stop cutting me off.
I need you.
If you're asking a question, you got to let me answer the fucking question. But
you're not answering the question.
What's the question? But
all right. So we sort of, to be fair, the debate sort of goes here. It gets snarkier as it goes, believe it or not. And she keeps going back to this like, well, you haven't said what's in it for men, and you haven't described the step-by-step. At one point, she says, you're on my show. They both accused each other of interrupting. Towards the end of this, and just because I've already been streaming for 3 hours here, and so you could see how far we have left to go in the debate, at least. I think you could see we're not even halfway through it. So it's still going here. So we're a third of the way through, and I'm 3 hours in, which would mean we're looking at a 9-hour stream if I get the whole way through this, right? So I think this is the bulk of what you see occurring here, though, right? She, by the end of this, it sort of starts to criticize him because he calls homosexuality degeneracy, etc. He makes the point that, like, well, don't you think that certain things are degenerate? For example, someone having relations with a dog, wouldn't that be degeneracy? And she hems and haws like, I guess that'd be degeneracy, but I just don't think you should be telling dudes that go and sleep with a bunch of people that they're being degenerates. But it's like, okay, well, should Jesus have shut up too? Sure, on one hand, you could be like, I don't want people moralizing to me. And that's fair, but that is sort of the nature of people that are discussing their religious beliefs. Like, I could think someone who's in an open relationship and plowing a bunch of people and leaving their wife get plowed is a degenerate. That might upset the person if I say that about it, but that's my opinion. Now, what I prescribe to happen to that person could be unreasonable. For example, if I said that degeneracy should be outlawed, I think that now there's room to say, no, wait a minute. That's your opinion on what's degeneracy. Who are you to make it illegal? Of course, there are certain things that we consider degeneracy that we do think should be illegal. The aforementioned relationships with animals, relationships with children. With some forms of degeneracy, we're just like, we have personal preferences that we find it morally disgusting, but we're not advocating by force stopping you from engaging in that sort of behavior. My mileage is going to vary from Andrew's. Andrew's probably going to be more willing, through force of law, to make things illegal that he considers degenerate. Nonetheless, like, the idea that we can't offer these prescriptions, and it seems ironic to me because sort of, I don't know Pearl very well. I haven't watched her content a lot, so I might be totally off base with this. I may be, But doesn't it seem like she sort of criticizes sort of like the OnlyFans type girls and like girls that she sees as like being too promiscuous? That's the vibe I get. Like, for example, in this debate alone, when Andrew asked about promiscuous women and whether that lowers their value, she was basically like, unfortunately, maybe not sometimes. Well, what do you mean, unfortunately? The implication is she's moralizing. And even if she's never personally sort of been critical in a moral framework of like the OnlyFans type girls, she certainly brought Andrew on her channel and sort of praised him for going at a lot of these OnlyFans girls. So when I saw her interview Andrew last, she wasn't like, who are you to lecture these OnlyFans girls? I'm tired of that. So is the implication it's okay to lecture men or women but not men? I don't know. Someone says she does a lot of good in the space. Her weakness is the no prescription. Yeah, listen. There certainly should be more people advocating for men's issues. I thoroughly believe that. And I think even in this debate, you see there's a lot of agreement on the problems that are being isolated that both Andrew and Pearl are agreeing on. But I'm just analyzing the debate that I see in front of me. Then she makes the other two things that I think is funny. She sort of is like, who are you to tell men how to live? Do you think men are stupid? And Andrew's like, again, I go back to this sort of obese, like, again, if my doctor tells me like, hey man, you should lose some weight, like, I'm not going to be like, who are you? You think you're the big man? Who are you to, how dare you accuse me of, it's like, how dare you tell me how to live my life? It's like, hey man, I'm just telling you, this would be better for you in my opinion, and I have data to back that up. That's sort of what Andrew's saying. Actually, getting married and having these mitigating strategies and advocating for changing laws and having men's rights groups, these are good. These are good things. But she keeps just, she's like, you think men are, like, she brings up her producer and she's like, well, shouldn't my producer, why don't you tell him what he should do? Doesn't he have the best information himself to make the best decision for himself? Well, yes, but you could say that about anyone offering advice on anything. Then she keeps saying that Andrew's solutions aren't pragmatic. And he's like, okay, well then name me a solution that is pragmatic. And she's like, I can't. Well, the term pragmatic itself means like actually doable in the real world. And if you can't name one thing that's actually doable in the real world, then it seems that you're not some sort of authority on pragmatism. Roman says, Rob, this comes down to what about the men, though? How is it not? Be virgin, sacrifice. Who's telling you to be a virgin? It's amazing. Again, imagine Roman King says to me, Rob, you should lose weight. You're a little overweight. Like, I think you're going to feel much better if you lose weight. Ah, here we go. Sacrifice. Don't eat pizza. I could never eat pizza. There we go. This guy coming in. Don't eat pizza. Sacrifice for everyone. Don't eat pizza. It's like, no, man, you can eat the fucking pizza. I'm not telling you to be a virgin. I'm telling you the chance to maximize your happiness would be to get a loving wife, to have a meaningful relationship, to have a child with a woman who will be an excellent mother to that child. hopefully multiple children. That would maximize your happiness. There are things you could do to make that more likely. One of those things is the less people that you're sleeping with and that your partner has slept with, the better the chances that that marriage sticks. Maybe there's an 85% chance that marriage sticks if you've each only slept with one person. Maybe that decreases to an 82% chance it sticks if you've each slept with two people. Is that me telling you never under any circumstances have sex with someone before marriage? I'm not saying that at all. If you tell me, hey man, maybe you should lose weight, is that you telling me no, never under any circumstances eat any chocolate? No, it's not. You'll say, the more chocolate you eat, the worse off you'll be. But sure, you can indulge here and there. Then you say, be a virgin. Sacrifice yourself for the greater good. No one's suggesting you sacrifice yourself for the greater good. I could suggest that you have a family purely for personal reasons. Screw the world. Your happiness will increase if you have a loving family and child. It's not a sacrifice. Join the military if we get invaded, and for what? You just seem to be rambling about other things now. I'm not telling you to join the military. If you're saying that there's compulsory military service, fine. That's true. Men have to sign up for selective services. That's absolutely true. I would say we're a far cry from that being enforced. It was horrific what happened in Vietnam. Totally agree. And nonetheless, what's this have to do with whether or not you should get married? You're pissed off because men have to register for selective services, and so your protest is going to be, I'll show you what I'll do. I'll never look for a woman that I could have a meaningful relationship in. I guess I would consider that cutting off your nose despite your face, but right, Felix, he said he's making a threat. He's saying less is better. I think a lot of men either go with I'll just bang as many chicks as possible, or I'm just going to check out. What's up, Rachel? How's it going? It's great to hear from you. But Andrew's not saying, Andrew himself admits, Andrew's saying, I'm in a loving marriage. I'm in a marriage that I think is the highest value that I could achieve. It's worth more than money. It's worth more than any internet success. My marriage, my kids, my family, my religion. Those are the things that are of the most value to me. By the way, if we centered society around those things, it would be the most advantageous societally as well to maximize happiness and morality. However, having said that, I am outlining what is your best chance to maximize your chance of getting that, while fully admitting that I myself as an individual did not maximize my chance. I didn't save myself for marriage. Okay. He is not saying, well, that's it. You slept with one person. That's it. Game over. You're miserable for the rest of your life. You don't deserve to get married. You shouldn't even try. It's just like, hey, I'm just saying this would maximize your chance. You could be a dude that was out there and slept with 30, 40 chicks, maybe even more. I don't know. To me, that sounds like an absurd number, sleeping with 30, 40 chicks, but maybe not now. Maybe that's considered normal. I don't know. I'm an old man, happily married, so I don't, admittedly, I don't know what the normal for the dating scene is at this point. But even if you slept with some absurd amount of people and you're a man, you may find happiness. You may find marriage. You may have kids with a loving wife who's a great mother and be 70 years old and sitting on a porch drinking sun tea on a rocking chair and die happy beside your wife of 50 years before you enter the kingdom of heaven. And great. But it's about maximizing the chance. That's the point. And Pearl the irony is Andrew and Pearl, they're both identifying a problem. They're like, yeah, we sort of agree on the problem, but what do we do about it? And for me, the overarching theme is Pearl is only giving, she's hiding behind the fact that it's like, well, I just outlined facts and I'm not telling you what to do with it. But if you scratch the surface of that even a little, you realize that if you only outline facts that could only potentially lead to one conclusion, and you're intentionally not talking about facts that could go the other way, that you're sort of suggesting a conclusion. Again, I go back to the, hey, Rob, should I buy a Ford or should I buy a Dodge? Hey, I'm not trying to sway you. Far be me from me telling you what to do. Here's 100 facts on why Fords are pieces of shit. Okay, do you have anything to say about the Dodge? No. Do you have anything good to say about the Ford? No. But hey, I'm not telling you what to do. I don't care what decision you make. I'm not trying to influence you one way or the other. My job's just to lay out facts. Well, no. That's right. Rachel says it's multi-generational. Of course. And there's two ways to look at it. There is, how can we change society for the better? But then there is, I'm a dude. I'm a woman. I'm an individual. What would be best for me? Even if 99% of people decide to be secular and say, I'm never going to get married and I'm just going to go out and bang as many people as possible. What's best for you, the individual? I would argue that that lifestyle is not going to be what fulfills you. Maybe it will, but I think there's a better than not chance that it won't. And that the best chance you have from truly being fulfilled is to try to find, even if it's a diamond in the rough, but to try to find that person that you're compatible with and can get married in the eyes of God and have a loving wife and a child. And if I had the overarching criticism I have of Pearl is, I think that sort of the materialist worldview seeps through in how she was debating here tonight. Because when she keeps saying like, family, she doesn't even give a time of day for Andrew to like explain, what does it mean that family is something that men get? That children and loving mothers is something that men get? What does that even mean? She just hand waves it. And it seems evident to me that when she keeps asking, but what do men get? And she's eschewing things like family, that what she's really meaning is like, but like financially. And maybe it's a result of not having children or not being married. I don't know. But when, at one point where Andrew's like, well, that maximize the child's uprearing to have, an intact married household with biological parents, is what his implication is. And she's like, yeah, but how's that good for the dad? How's that good for the man? It's like, if you have to ask why maximizing outcomes for a father's child is beneficial for the father, I mean, is there anyone out there that has kids that even for a moment would be like, sure, that would be what's best for my kid, but what's in it for me? Well, what's in it for you is what's best for your kid, because you deep down, you want your kid to thrive so much. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have independent goals and things of that nature, but to just act like that's not of benefit to a father? I think that our culture has embraced materialism so much that it is like unthinkable to so many people. Like, it's just like, what do you mean family? What do you mean having a loving wife? What do you mean having children? Like, how does that benefit me financially? How's that benefit? Does that get me more free time? Does that give me more of an ability to go on vacation? Can I buy a better house? Does my career get easier? No? Then what's the benefit to me? All right. I see I'm getting more super chats, so let's get to some more. Send that money. Even people like Roman, who I was picking on. You guys are the best. I appreciate, really. I booted a couple people, but they were garbage. The rest of you guys are the best. You're fantastic. Some guy becomes a new member. Thank you, some guy. Much better than specific guy. We prefer some guy. Thank you so much. Balazania for 5 months been a member. Thanks so much. Says, when we come for the R, you won't get far. Thanks. Appreciate it. Otis Driftwood, how's it going, my friend? Gives 5 membership. Thank you so much. With Ghost for $10. Thank you. Says, it's pretty ironic considering the 2 men outside of our family she is close with, Andrew Wilson and Donovan Sharp, are both happily married. One religious and the other secular. Well, there you go. Beta for $2. Thank you. Says, now that Rob has time to research, he's unbeatable. We'll see. Till I get crushed in my next debate and you guys are like, what a bum. We threw in with this guy. With Ghosts for $10. Thanks so much. Again, thank you. Says, according to Pearl, we shouldn't do anything at all and just let things fall where they may. We shouldn't take any active steps towards pushing the agenda we want. Right. Now she would say, to steal me in her position, she'd say, I didn't say that. But she sort of did, because she goes at Andrew for like moralizing and telling people what to do. But it's clear from listening to Andrew, he's not like he's saying, listen, I'm outlining what I see as the path that leads you to the most righteous and valuable life. You could disagree. I'm not twisting your arm. That's the way I see it. Jess Gerald, again, thank you so much. Incredibly generous. Says, just felt like you needed more money. I did. With Ghost, thank you. Might be winning tonight with Ghost. I don't know. Him and Jess Gerald, it's close. Another $20. Thanks, With Ghost. Says, it was funny her saying that men are tired of being nagged, not realizing that men are tired of being nagged by women, telling men what a real man is. Men need to hold other men responsible for their actions. Iron sharpens iron. Agreed. And yeah, Andrew even brings up that sort of performative contradiction towards the end of the debate, where she's like, you don't have the right to tell men how to live their life. But she herself is criticizing Andrew and telling him he shouldn't be telling other men what to do, which is particularly funny as a woman, based on her worldview. Damien, so much for $2. Maryland Man de la Mancha Gershwin. Rob, do you have any plans for member exclusive content? I do. So I'm talking to my editor, Black Elk, and we're going to start doing stuff. I think we're going to do some more fun stuff for members only. Maybe like some video game streams, plus some like less serious non-political stuff. We will consider adding like serious political stuff for members only as well, though. Rachel, thank you so much. Really appreciate it for $20. Says, the secret no one talks about in this debate is the fact that men are actually the romantic ones. They want to love and be loved. I think we make the mistake of thinking they only want sex. They also want and purpose. Yeah, that's absolutely true, right? Like, there's a reason, and it has to do with sort of our purpose, whether you look at it through a spiritual or biological sense, why men are willing to sacrifice for women. Now, can things get out of control? Can women take advantage of that? Of course. But the idea of love beyond just physical lust or physical needs certainly is prevalent with men, and our society has pushed this narrative the opposite, that women are these ones that just are like, oh, they're so romantic and they want these relationships, and men are just these pigs that are like, whatever, I just need something to have sex with. That's not true. And by the way, I think that everyone in this debate would agree with that, because when you hear people talking about suicide rates of men that get divorced, that's not just because, well, I lost money or, well, I lost my sexual partner. That's because a lot of times men have deeply invested emotionally into these relationships, and then it's stripped out from them. Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason that someone might self-harm because of divorce, but certainly it implies that there's more to it than just a lustful or sexual-based relationship. Frank Heck for $5. Thanks so much. Says, this is just for whatever and being awesome. Thank you, Frank. I try. And Damien, once more, thank you so much for gifting 5 memberships. You guys, fantastic. Now, I missed a lot of the chats. HN says, should women be forced to live with their abuser forever? Depends on your definition of abuse. But no, let's say take it to an extreme. If a man's beating the crap out of a woman over and over, should she be forced to stay there? No, I don't think so. But what do you mean by abuse? Like verbal abuse? Personally, I don't think a woman or a man should be forced to stay in any relationship. I think that we should culturally push for the values that we think would maximize social cohesion and personal happiness and value. But I suppose if you really want to leave the relationship you're in, then you should be allowed to leave it. You might say, well, that separates you from Andrew or Rachel and what their feelings on no-fault divorce would be. Maybe. I haven't talked to them specifically about it. But it's of my personal belief that we should socially ostracize people that are cheat or leave their spouse. I think we should, but I don't think we should compulsory force by the threat of a gun by law that like some cop stays outside their house and says, you can't leave, you have to stay here. Or as Rachel said, she should probably clean more. What if he's berating her every day for not cleaning? No, I don't think she should be forced. But again, abuse is a real big, broad word that we use. Oftentimes what you'll hear is despicable things being done by one partner. And the way this normally works is like a woman. And they'll be like, well, it was abuse. She suffered abuse. He said mean things to her. I don't look into this thoroughly, but I could say this. Anecdotally, what I've seen, and maybe someone will correct me and I'm wrong, but of people in relationships that I've personally seen be pretty contentious, let's put it as diplomatically as possible, I've tended to see that the men predominantly in those relationships are more likely to bite their tongue. Right? Something little gets under their craw and they don't say anything. They just bite their tongue and don't say anything about it. And then the woman might, any little thing, and I'm not saying this is universal. I certainly know women that's not the case. But any little thing, they'd be like, oh, what about that? You didn't do that. How about that. And then what happens, like, have you ever seen the movie Anger Management? Where, like, it's actually a funny movie. But Jack Nicholson's a psychiatrist and then Adam Sandler gets sent to this anger management class. And Adam Sandler's argument's like, I don't have an anger problem. And they're like, well, yeah, you do. You're the kind of guy that never shows his anger, and you build it up and 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 up until you explode. And I think that happens a lot in relationships. And so particularly if someone wants to selectively make it seem a certain way. So maybe, and again, my experience has been that it's been the people I'd known when I was a bartender that I would see this, you would have like a woman that was just constantly needling some guy. And then finally, at the end of the night, he's like, F you, slut, or something like that. And that's what everyone sees. And they're like, ooh, that's abuse. There's abuse. And it's like, I guess, if you want to say that that's a form of verbal abuse. But what was it when she was needling him? Was that abuse? So, I mean, it's... And I'm not saying that can't happen the other way. It may very well. I'm just saying as a bartender, that's what I notice. Yeah, Rachel, I don't know. I might put myself in that category. He says, I'd say there's a huge swath of Americans that call themselves Christians but aren't the least bit serious. I don't know if I'm the least bit serious. I don't go to church. I don't read the Bible often. I'm going to start going to church now that I'm not working ridiculous hours. My excuse has gone away. My son's going to go to Catholic school, so we're going to start going to Sunday Mass. But I've not been a good Christian for sure. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. I'm not Catholic. I was non-denominational Christian. I explained this last night. I went to a church. We didn't even have a preacher. Just local people in the town would take turns coming in and just telling us lessons from the Bible. So it was surface level stuff. A couple more super chats and we're going to get out of here soon. With Ghost for $5 says, well, if it depends on which hand he smacks her with. Front hand is abuse, backhand's discipline. Just a comedian. True story. When I met my wife, well, I'd met her once or twice before, but we never talked. But the first time that I talked to her, we were at a party. It was like a Halloween party. And we had mutual friends. And they were talking to each other. And me and her we were sitting on these stairs. And she was a little tipsy, and so was I. And she starts talking about why she would make a good wife someday. She's like, I'm an excellent cook. I like cleaning. Like, I think I would be a fantastic wife. What would you bring to a marriage? And I said, a good backhand. And she laughed. And that's when I realized, like, what a gem. Jimothy, thanks so much for $5. Says, got any debates planned for the future you could talk about, Rob? Yeah, Friday. Anybody saw last night? There was this person whose avatar was a fox. I didn't know if they were a man or woman or something in between. I'm not sure. His name was Mel. I'm not trying to be rude. I couldn't tell by their voice, and I didn't see a video, so I don't know. Nonetheless, I'll be debating this Mel person on is gender the same as sex? Now, objectively, it's not, because it isn't, because people have used gender in a different way. So I'm saying that it ought to be the same, and that it's been bastardized by people for cultural Marxist and political reasons. But whatever, that's the topic they picked. So there we go. Doing the Tran debate for the bajillionth time. Maybe this time I'll actually research it. Like, I know a lot of people research, like, what I know it started with queer theory, and they'll probably have the authors and stuff. So maybe I should look into some of that stuff and get boned up more for these debates. But yeah, that'll be Friday on Sarah the Raging Tomatoes show at like 8:30 or 9, something like that. I know I'm going to be talking to Ryan McCulley here soon. I talked to Jake Rattlesnake. Those won't be debates, but those are interview or like sort of collaboration shows I'm going to be doing with them. The 28th on Sarah Tomatoes show, it'll be me versus an entire panel of people. And the prompt is, we should mock and laugh criticisms that the media and Democrats have against Trump. So that'll be fun. As far as any other debates that I specifically have lined up, I am unsure of. We'll see what Andrew has planned. As far as debates that he has coming up, I'll certainly take an interest in those. And but yeah, that's where I'm at so far. I've also offered a couple other people, Aircraft Sparky. I've been in talks with maybe doing a show with him. Then there's some other folks I was talking about. I would like to set up a debate show where I have no idea who I'm debating or what the topic is. So I think that we're going to set that up, and I'm pretty sure I got the guy that's going to be the moderator for that, which is nice for me because that's zero prep work, and we'll just let that dude set up all the debates. He'll get in touch with the person, set it up. The Trans Fox tactic is to bury you in biased stats, just so you're aware. Appeal to authority is lost. Oh, okay. What statistics are they going to have that? We'll see. For me, like, the gender debate, I'll just give my strategy up. So, Mel, if you're listening, here you go. Here's my strategy. The problem with the gender debate is, right, when we really get down to brass tacks and we say, okay, then if you're right that it's a bimodality, which means that biological sex is two extremes and then a threshold in between, then it implies that the two genders would also be those two extremes and then things all about in between. So if we, at the base level, just look at, well, then how do we define those two genders, man and woman? How do you define woman? It is inevitable that if you're not defining it in some form of like adult, female, human, that you're going to have some answer that relies on subjectivity. Well, a woman is what I think a woman is, or a woman is a person who thinks they're a woman, which renders the definition meaningless. Any definition that is completely subjective and changes from person to person has no utility as a definition, at least no functional utility. It has a utility if you're a Marxist, a cultural Marxist, and you're trying to change language to be fluid to shoehorn in your opinions whenever it matters. Yeah, I don't understand the term. Like, I'm no fucking, like, people throw these Latin words out and all this shit. I don't know. Just speak to me like I'm the dumb redneck that I am. So, for example, think of the problems we have with this. Well, studies show that women make 79 cents to the dollar as men. Really? That's what that study said? Did it ask? How did it determine who's a man and who's a woman? Did it ask? If I show up and say, hey, here's my salary, are they going to assume, oh, biological male? Did they ask me? Maybe I'm a woman. How do we know? We have programs to help women. Why? Who decides who's a woman? In fact, if it's a subjective meaning of what a woman is, why can't I change at a moment's notice? So there's no utility in the word anymore. It's just, well, it means, and by the way, like, everybody knows this, right? Because as soon as something happens where they could go back to their old sort of victimhood mentality, look, that guy just beat that woman. How do you know? Did you ask them? All I saw was a video of a guy who looks like a traditional form of what a male is and someone who looks like a traditional form of what a female is, but no one asked them if they were a man and woman. In fact, maybe they're neither. Maybe they're zers. How do we know? How could you make any proclamation? And again, I go back to this. You could say, I'm 2'7", I'm tall. I choose. Tall just means anyone who thinks they're tall. Okay, but then what's the utility of that word? The meaning of the word's not for you as the individual. Language is about other people understanding it. So if I subjectively change a word to mean whatever I want, that's fine. I have the right to do that, but it now serves no utility because no one else will understand what I'm saying. All right, a couple more super chats. With Ghost, thanks so much for another $10. Says, by the way, congratulations, Rob, on this opportunity to stream full time. You're dangerous with no research. I look forward to Rob that does research. Don't disappoint. I will try not to. Thank you, With Ghost. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I've been trying to do some research for other folks to help the Crucible out here in the past couple days. I hope that it's paid off. So I'll talk to Andrew. We'll see how that's working. If I need to change my research tactics or anything like that, I look forward to being able to research for my own debates. Maybe I'll put a little time in tomorrow to doing some research for this gender debate, but I really don't know. Like, I mean, I suppose there could be statistics on, like, if it delves into like biological competition between men and women or behaviors, etc. I suppose that we could break into those sorts of things. Then I guess there's also like academic scholarly articles on the formation of these terms and when they began and stuff. But mostly, I don't know what research is necessary because it seems mostly to be like sort of just a semantic rhetorical battle, but I should do something. And Balasanya, thanks so much for $2, says, I only know what a woman is because Big R told me. Well, good. Now you know. Now you know what you've been missing out on. So, all right. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this. Now, full disclosure, the whole purpose of this tonight was, oh, no. When did that stop? Well, anyways, bad news. I was recording a video as well while doing this because my editor suggested that I have two screens going. So we'll see if that helped him out. So hopefully we'll be able to get this edited down to something that's a little more manageable than the 3.5 hours that was. So is anyone streaming that I could raid? Let's look at that. Because I think I stumbled through how to do this the other day. Yeah. Not going to raid that person. I didn't see anyone. All right. Well, it's been real. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Even those that disagree with me that are wrong. No, I appreciate it. I do. You guys are awesome. I should be streaming tomorrow. Time indeterminate. I'm trying to intentionally not stream at the same time that people in the Crucible like Rachel and Andrew are, because even though they wouldn't care, one, I just think is working with them, it doesn't make sense to stream at the same time. And second, because I know a lot of my audience would be watching them. So if I'm going to maximize my own audience, wouldn't make sense to do that. So thank you so much. I had 244 people watching. Thank you. You guys are the best. So enjoy your night. I got some slightly depressing stuff to do regarding my old job tomorrow. So prayers would be appreciated. Still dealing with the person that I deeply care about that's having a really tough medical situation. So at the bare minimum, I'm going to visit that person in the hospital tomorrow. It's going to be a long day. It'll be a rough time. And I'm not going to raid Tomato because there's lefties on there that I choose not to raid. So normally I would, but you guys can go over to Tomato's channel if you want. Screw it. You guys... Let me figure this out. Mm-hmm. How did they tell me to do the studio customization? Community content. You think I would have remembered how to do this? Do you guys remember what it was under? Hang on. Now you got me. I can't for the life of me figure out where the heck. Oh, thanks. Not quite dead. It says overtime pay. Trying. Customization. There we go. We got. All right. Customization. Home tab. No. Profile. Are you sure it was customization? Didn't we figure out it wasn't that last time? Edit stream properties, then customization. Oh, yeah. Okay, now I remember. All right. All right, we should be good. All righty, thank you guys. You're the best. Sorry for, oh man, HN, thanks for the $3 super sticker. There we go. Thank you, HN. We did it. You got your nightly watch Rob be a boomer and not know how to work YouTube. Always good. Oh, yay. So I'm going to get some sleep. I was up late last night. I'm up late tonight. So you guys are awesome. We'll talk to you all tomorrow. As always, have a good one.